Hello and welcome to Supreme Commander Forged Alliance, the greatest real-time strategy in the history of humanity. So you might find this video is quite long, but only about half will be Supreme Commander Forged Alliance. The other half is going to be a reading of In the Ravine, so if you're not interested, that will be at the end. And if you're a Chekhov fan and you see Supreme Commander Forged Alliance, might as well watch it. But In the Ravine will be at the very end. So just doing some experiments. Hopefully it's not intrusive for anybody. We got Michka and Pietros going in a ranked game. More of average Joes, although these Joes are actually quite good. These are ranked ladder stats, not the global stats. These are definitely above average players, so they'll know what they're doing. Second air is the standard on this map on Loki, and I definitely should speed it up. And a map like this, basically 10 expansion points where you get your starting positions, then 9 others, 8 others if you subtract 2 from 10. But you really want to grab at least 4 of the different expansions. You can see one with 2 at a Hydra, 3, 2, 3, and the 4s in the corners. So how you spread out your engineers and how you raid enemies' engineers and where you put your ACU really shapes what this game is going to look like. So of course scouting and raiding is very important, and on a map that's 10 by 10, raiding with air is going to be critical. Michka is going to go with a bomber on the second air after 7 PGens. Anticipate something very similar for Pietros, actually identical. Looks like a little quicker for Michka, who must have assisted with an engineer. And yeah, more PGens. Looks like third land from Michka back at base. Much faster ACU for Pietros, who is going to take the ACU up to the top. And the difference here between Seraphim and Cybern is the floating artillery at Tech 1. So these spawns become critical. Something you definitely want to take into account. Here comes a bomber plus a scout. A bomber from Pietros as well plus a scout. Well, you can see the difference in speed a little faster. For Pietros, expanding engineer has been spotted, and looks like Michka is going to get an important kill. And it looks like both players taking out the respective engineers on this front expansion. And will these bombs be successful? 2 successful bombs for Michka. So you can see we're calling these average Joes, but I don't think that would really fit. Interesting, very similar bombing runs. Nearly identical, but no bomb is dropped here by Pietros, so slight advantage for Michka. Although this Hydra has been started, lucky for Pietros, the ACU will pick that up and finish it off. And here 2 spread out engineers, one of them will die. But it looks like that's all it's going to be. Very similar rating, and all the rating. Actually, this bomber is still not dead, amazingly. Now it is 2 kills for both those bombers. Haven't seen too much rating on the ground, at least not yet. 2 engineers at least on the power spam, 2 engineers on the land spam from Michka. See what it is, 1 engineer on the land spam and 2 engineers on the power spam. So very similar. Also power storage, very early power storage for Pietros. And in terms of air control, it looks like a couple more interceptors for Michka here. But what we've seen is this really good denial of these forward 3 mask structures. There's also quite a bit of reclaim available. And the ACUs probably won't meet each other for a very long time. We'll see who has the better expansion early on, who has the better idea. A bomber from Michka looking for more kills. This engineer here will be very nice to kill. Very much undefended, and it doesn't look like there will be any air support. You can see the move here with these interceptors. They're going to cover the bomber. That shouldn't have any problems taking out that NG. So it's not looking too good for Pietros here on the right side, not on the bottom, but a very good looking push to the top. Will deny any engineers. Good scouting with interceptors. So we're going to see this map get divided vertically. Also a fairly large force here for Pietros. should get into position to grab this engineer to protect it. But also very important, tank and a Celine, if they can take out this expanding engineer. So we've seen here first 6 minutes, it's all been about denying the expanding engineers. And so far you can see in terms of mass production, 9 mass extractors each, no upgrades yet. It's dead even. And here Michka really got to grab these others. Makes a very big difference how quickly you get them. And it looks like now air superiority for Michka is beginning to pay off. Once again, there's no engineering present up top for Pietros. And another expanding engineer taken out. But this is where this tank did the job. Here's a dead engineer denying these bottom 4 mexes. And actually here Pietros will begin to take an advantage. And that's these corner mass extractors. And missed opportunity by Michka. But one thing that's worked out very well for Michka, denying any engineers to go to the top. So the only real engineer has been the ACU, who did a lot of good work. The Hydro and 4 mass extractors will now get a factory. But the battle over this bottom here is still going on. A rather large force Tech 1 from Pietros is going to go in that direction. Michka will know about it, and still Michka less power but much more interceptors. This is something that should be corrected by Pietros, who's now going to go for more air factories. And when you have this type of air control, gestures are obvious with a Cybern, or even drops. Something like this is a perfect dropping opportunity. Fairly important battle, even numbers, not much micro from Pietros. Michka is trying to hit him on the weak side instead of going straight on, trying to maximize firing power. But looks like both forces are just going to stare at each other now. Pietros will wait for his ACU to come in to get the advantage. And now this bomber, if he can deny this engineer once again, this will be a really nice piece of denial by Michka. Although this factory should just start producing engineers, take over this area. And now in the air battle, fairly even numbers. And was that a dodge? Successful dodge from Pietros, and still nothing on the bottom. One thing about Pietros, he's been quite slow of moving out with his engineers, and combined with good rating from Michka. But 2 engineers here moving out. He has a very good opportunity to have very big map control. Air battle continues. It's very close, but looks like it'll be just taken by Michka. 2 air factories for Michka. Fairly even power production. And 2 air factories for Pietros, who's now making transports. No Tech 2 yet from either player, coming up minute 10. And now the ACU for Michka will move down. Really, if he has any chance in this game, he's got to grab map control, so he'll try to use his ACU. Superior forces for Michka. As Pietros will build up a good defensive position with a point defense, but taking a long time to grab those mass extractors. Have we seen any upgrades? And if Pietros here realizes that he has map control, he can switch to very fast teching. When you have this type of advantage in the mass production, you can really stop trying to grab expansions, build good defense, and just start teching, and you will be in a better position. It's a safe way to play, but it looks like instead of that, Pietros will do drops with engineers. Although it'll be very difficult to hold on to this position unless Michka stops this advance, and it doesn't look like he will. He's moving a lot of his air forces in this direction, so this single engineer is probably not going to make it. And also a rather large land force is moving down as well. No problems whatsoever for Pietros, just mowing down small units of Cybern. And now really taking a big lead. He might have started upgrading here. We should check. Also 2200 on the reclaim. Still no upgrades, which Could be a bit disappointing. I mean, I think when you have a little over 500 mass, this much power might as well upgrade. Especially when you're ahead. Michka, quite a bit more reclaim, but really not much in the bank. And now a successful drop, and this is where Michka will begin to get map control back. And if Pietros doesn't use his advantage now, this game might be evened out rather quickly. A very good looking Celine here as well. Pietros using the stealth or cloaking ability and stealth, so you can see what's going on. So unless the ACU or some Tech 3 Omni comes in, it will not be seen. So neither player really has an ability to end the game because the ACUs are way apart. Still very powerful units at this Tech 1 stage. Something like Tech 2 Air or Jester Snipe would definitely be a possibility if you wanted to end the game fast. This is what's happening. Actually, the advantage is still significant. But a couple more loose mass extractors still not taken by Michka. And once he does, the advantage in mass is not going to be that large. And this air control from Michka is still significant, although perhaps some problems with micro, but he still should win air. And if he wins air, drops on this map, dropping here, dropping there, it's putting a lot of pressure. As we're seeing, Pietros really building up massive land forces, which he's not really using. It looks like this force will move to the bottom. We should anticipate two big battles here, one on top, one on bottom. And it does appear we're seeing upgrades from Michka. He's going to get a couple of Tech 2 mass extractors, and now he has overtaken Pietros in mass production, at least momentarily. But it's basically even now. The map is divided exactly in half in terms of mass points. And it will now be a race in terms of who upgrades their mass extractors faster. And we are seeing some upgrades for Pietros and Michka taking the lead. Actually, not basically dead even. As we're seeing an assault, really good engineering force from Pietros. Built up a Tech 1 point defense, 6 kills already on this point defense, plus a rather large force. And this ACU from Michka needs to regroup. He does have a lot of good reinforcements coming in. And here we did see that air battle where Michka took air control, but that really gave him nothing. He still has a good looking air force, but just killing off the enemy air force, showering them with free reclaim, really does nothing for you. You gotta capitalize, and the transport here standing by. As we're seeing a push now from Pietros here, minute 14. Reinforcements from Michka. We're still at the Tech 1 stage. And Tech 1 stage at minute 15, not that surprising if you have a lot of action, but we actually haven't seen that many battles. Looks like we might see some escalation here. No point defense, so this is in danger of being lost by Michka. Not very good micro from Michka, just running in one by one. Good focusing fire from Pietros. Is just basically execution here. Not something you want to do. And it'll be a victory for Pietros. Michka is now going to lose a factory and a couple mass extractors. This is where a couple engineers from Pietros will be really nice. It's a lot of free reclaim. All these dead Cybern. On the other side, we have a standoff with a whole bunch of point defenses on both sides. Neither player seems to really want to fight here. Well, there is an Artie that's slowly going to be taken out. Point defenses, and Michka will take care of it. Medusa working as a scout. Does a good job. Wow, how did I miss this? Apologies. Michka with a very good looking raid, taking out 3 mass extractors, and looks like he will still win unless these engineers are successful. Looks like these forces from Cybern got behind enemy lines, behind point defenses, will be massacred, although they did deny this point defense, but eventually they will all die. but 3 mask extractors denied nonetheless. It is very important to offset this loss here for Michka. Don't understand how I missed that. I don't even know where those came from. They must have came through here. And now push from Pietros, at least thinking about it. His point defense not taken out yet. It's very close to dying, but... And now finally it will be taken out. But with the ACU here, especially a couple overcharges from Michka will be very nice. Michka does have the ability, and that there we just saw an overcharge. So this should be a nice massacre for Michka, a lot of reclaim. And then once he takes out this force, a couple of Medusas, and he can go ahead and grab those point defenses. As Pietros pushing up at another really good reclamation field. So much reclaim available for either player, and really should belong to Pietros. As we're really seeing power going up into the 1000 mark. A lot of tech to mask extractors for Michka. And do we see Tech 2 yet from anybody? No, still not at Tech 2 land. So Ilsha was extremely powerful on this map. The Tech 2 bot for Seraphim, but you don't really want to keep him here in the back of your base. You got to throw him out, especially somewhere where there isn't an ACU. Together with this force, that would look very good. It looks like another really good raid. And here's an Ilsheva. We'll have to keep track on these, see how many kills they get. And one thing on this map is very important is the radar coverage. And I have a feeling that the radar coverage isn't that good for these players. They're letting a lot of stuff sneak through. Actually here it looks like all the raiders have been killed. It's just scouts for Michka. Pietros, this is a very good raider. He's got a couple of good ones up on top, another good one on the bottom. Not too much coverage here. But even though he had Raider, this group of Cybern just walked through, going to deny him 4 Tech 1 mask extractors. And now we see an Ilsheva, 8 kills, getting hit by Medusas. Unable to move. And now Bomber will finish that off. As Pietros with Tech 2 on his ACU will build a stronghold up on the hill. He's already got a shield, Tech 2 point defense, and this is where putting cruise missiles here. These are in range of all these Tech 2 mask extractors, and Michka's base could really turn the game. Cruise missiles here would look very good. Looks like Pietros will deny that attack. They did lose a couple of mask extractors, but plenty of reclaim if he gets it quick. Can really deny the effectiveness of enemy raids if you have engineers standing by to grab all the reclaim and recap your mask extractors. Tech to power for Pietros. He has now overtaken Michka in power. As we're seeing a drop coming in right next to a rather big air battle, and Michka continues to get more and more reinforcements. He should be able to win it, although Tech to flak here, I would love to see some Tech to flak. This Ilsheva is really lazy. This is nearly 1,000 mass just sitting there, plus a Tech 2 engineer. But at this stage, at minute 20, it would look very good to have a couple Tech to flak spread out over the field. As Michka, 26 kills, runs into a point defense. Reinforcements for Pietros. And another raid here to the front. 3 mask extractors, a point defense going up for Michka. And these Tech 1 forces, without the help of Tech 2, which are on vacation, are now finally going to move out. So that Tech 2 move from Pietros hasn't really used it too well, although here we do see a couple Ilshevas kind of thrown into battle. They're going to be stuck here behind enemy lines, and actually Cybern fairly good with dealing with these. Once the Ilshevas get hit by Medusas, they are unable to dodge. So not very effective. As Michka throws a lot of forces to his front 3 mask extractors, he's going to leave the back door open, and we are now seeing cruise missiles. Yep, here's a cruise missile launcher already with 1 kill. We're seeing dead mask extractors, and this will really turn the game. Michka invested thousands of mass into his Tech 2 mask extractors, which are now getting sniped. Something probably should have anticipated. I assume he did see that Tech 2 base. Yeah, he definitely see the Tech 2, so he should have anticipated cruise missiles. Definitely knows about him now. He was thinking about Tech 2 air with a couple of Corsairs, perhaps a snipe. So we're seeing Tech 1 air, or Tech 1 land versus Tech 2 land. Michka versus Pietros. But Tech 2 air versus Tech 1 air with Siren trying to use the Corsairs. And here the Corsairs coming in to help out. Point defenses are taken out as Michka moves in with the ACUs. Some Tech 1 anti-air to try to counter the Corsairs. This is a good way to use Corsairs to win map control. But total devastation inside Michka's base. One Tech 2 mass ejector remains. And we're now seeing the mass production really nearly doubled. Very unfortunate. So these Corsairs are really going to have to make a big difference. As we're seeing a big stream of Tech 1 and Tech 2 rolling through for Pietros, who's now sitting on 2 Tech 2 mass ejectors. So way ahead in terms of power. And once you get that power, you can get some more fancy things. Things like nano repair on the ACU, the gun. And when you're seeing a player stuck in the early stages, only with Tech 2, Tech 1, Seraphim ACU with the nano, very powerful. Could probably use it and just walk directly into Michika's base. This Corsair is without air support. It's one Tech 2 bomber that's really not that good. Air-to-air fighting, and it looks like these Corsairs will just be thrown away. Very unfortunate, very expensive planes. And it appears that Michika's thinking about using them as anti-air, which is not something you want to do. You can do that to some degree with Seraphim and UEF Tech 2 bombers, which are pretty good in air fighting, but not the Corsairs. As big land is coming in inside of Michika's base, all the Manti Tech 1 will be retreating. Whole bunch of Tech 1 from Pietros. There's also some Tech 2 units here as well. And more cruise missiles coming in. We're finally seeing some TMD up for Michika. Also some Tech 2 point defenses. This will be a critical battle if Pietros can win this. And looks like a mistake from Pietros. He did have those two groups, but instead of them coming in together to maximize the firepower, one of the groups was selected by Michka and pretty much wiped out. That did leave the door open for the other group of Tech 2, which is now devastating Michika's base. Taking out the TMD, now going to take out the Tech 2 point defense. This is a lot of Ilshevas, although Corsairs. It's one thing that Michika's had all game is air control, and now the Corsairs might be able to provide just that slight advantage. Tech 2, the last Tech 2 mass ejector, targeted, taken out. And all that Michika's going to have is a lot of reclaim. He's way behind on power. This power would also be a very good target. And Tech 2 powers Michika really needs. Now some Tech 2 flak. This will deny the Corsair counter. It's Pietros making more cruise missiles. And now Tech 2 all over the map. So this Air Force, if it flies in the wrong place, will be in a lot of trouble. Michka still Tech 1 on the ACU, although Tech 2, this is where the HQ is. So Tech 2 engineer for Michka, so Tech 2 power here would be nice. And one thing about this map, you can do very well, but if you don't finish off your enemies, leaving a lot of reclaim, map control can shift fairly quickly, and you can lose your advantage. But it'll be very difficult for Pietros to lose this advantage. It's a very good looking power production under a shield. With Tech 2 land, it'll be very difficult to break into that. And with Tech 2 flak, it'll be very difficult to break that with Corsairs. And under constant cruise missile bombardment, Pietros really shutting things down in Michka's main base. This is why it would be a good move for Michka to just move his main forces, his main structures, to a different position where his ACU is. Now, Ilsheva, together with a couple Thams, are going to take on a superior force. Looks like they'll run away, but likely run into a bunch of Tech 1 point defenses. As the cruise missiles just continue to come, see if they target the TMD. They're just targeting factories. This Tech to factory would be a nice target. See, that was the new cruise missile launcher with 4 kills. And here up on top, a very solid position for Pietros. Really nothing for him to worry about. Perhaps this could be one weak point here, but wouldn't be that big of a loss. Still a possibility to drop here, since Michka does have air control. But we're seeing more and more Tech 2 in Pietros' forces, who has been upgrading. He's now getting some mass storage around his Tech 2 mass extractors. But it's a bit surprising he's not upgrading mass extractors there in the back. Now we are seeing some rhinos, so finally Tech 2 land from Michka, and rhinos are quite nice. But just not enough numbers against Pietros. It's a good looking civilian here in the city. He's going to be holding down the passage as a rather large force from Michka is moving through. Very disappointing. There's so much reclaim here for Michka. And Pietros, to be fair, he's not really taking a big advantage of his position. He's upgrading rather slowly. Which is giving Michka the opportunity to come back in the game. If only he would grab all that mass and begin upgrading his secure areas. Because as it stands, there really isn't something that Pietros can do to end the game. But he can definitely hurt this position, fairly weak position for Michka. Reclamation, 20,000 for Michka. I imagine that's much higher than Pietros, and at least another 10,000 just laying there. Also looking at the radar. The radar situation is still not really improving that much for Michka. Pietros, meanwhile, this is very nice. Tech 2 radar will also be a great target. Very weak, only 50 health. So Tech 1 bomber would take that out in one pass. But you can see it is giving Pietros a rather big advantage. Be nice to see another radar here, as Cybern forces on a counterattack, forcing Pietros to move back. And this might actually make Pietros feel he doesn't get the luxury of seeing all these stats here. Feel that he might not actually be winning, because he knows he did a lot of damage to Michka, but he only has still half the map, and he is being raided. And this entire time he hasn't really had, and here's the scout, he hasn't really had air control, so that's something he's got to worry about, and he has seen Tech 2. So he might be anticipating that the economy for Michka might be fairly close. And one thing he might not know is just how much power Michka has, which is really the biggest advantage that Pietros has right now. But of course, what we can see is this is a good looking force from Michka, but all these raids, they did take out a couple mass extractors, but will not be much of a problem. Pietros, 20,000 reclaimed. Michka, 21,000. Actually, a bit disappointed in Michka here. He hasn't really... He needs more engineers here. He should have a much bigger reclaim advantage. As we've been seeing, the Ilsheva's really dominating everything, except here on the bottom, and it looks like the door was opened by Pietros, but he's ready for it. He's building many rows of Tech 1 point defenses. Looks like he was just hoping that Michka would go in, and Michka will go in, providing a lot of reclaim opportunities. This is an opportunity to get a couple Tech 3 mass extractors, and one thing to notice, no TMD. Yep, finally TMD coming in, but of course the Cybern missiles, very powerful. Looks like finally some Tech 2 on Michka's ACU. This is a lost opportunity. Michka could have done the exact same thing that Pietros did to him, but did not do it. for whatever reason. And now, actually quite a few, and nice Corsairs taking out the Tech 1 point defenses. This could be very good for Michka. He's snuck in a whole bunch of very powerful units all the way to the power. They're going to target the shield, I imagine. They need to target the shield, and if they take out all this power, this game will be even. Corsairs also coming in. We see all these forces, so it looked good for Pietros. It looked like it was a good idea, but these point defenses just didn't get the job done. And the power is now going down, although, yeah, that goes down as well. At least 2 of the 3. And if they can take out the 4th, a couple of Corsairs if they came in. But in terms of power production, both players after 30 minutes, okay, it looks like only 1 tech to power left. Michka is now in the lead in terms of power. In terms of mass production, you can see it's even because Pietros must have massive power problems. He's got all those shields which are draining, and the shields are taking the power that should be going to the mass extractors. So, a mistake that is capitalized upon by Michka. Will this turn the game? More Corsairs coming in. They can make the things very bad if they take out the last tech to power, and they're going to do it. So, absolute devastation. Pietros down to 160. And this is one argument for not recycling your Tech 1 power. It's in general, it's obvious once you get a lot of Tech 2 and when you get it under shields, it's very secure. Take your Tech 1 power and turn it back into mass. But the opposite of that is if you lose all your Tech 2 power, then you're really screwed. And that's exactly what is happening to Pietros. Michka is now way ahead. What you got to do if you're Pietros here is pause all the shields, and then focus on making power. And you can see how long it's taking Pietros, and it's not the mass that's the problem. 7,000 mass in the bank, and of course, even when Pietros finishes this tech to mass extractor, he'll still be power stalling. This is absolutely painful now for Pietros. Michka here needs to take advantage. And the way to take advantage, he can continue to dominate in terms of air. This is where taking a drop, putting it here. One thing when Pietros does not have power, he cannot make air, so he cannot counter. And actually, the amazing thing, still not finished. That took like a minute to finish the last 10%. And Tech 3 land. So Michka decided to go with Tech 3 land. He's also going to get some Tech 2 power. This will be a slower attack. I think this may be a missed opportunity by Michka. He could have either really teched up, or in terms of mass extractors, or went really strong air. Instead, he's just gone Tech 3 land, which is a good idea, but probably not ideal. But it should still be effective unless Pietros can catch up with him. Pietros still ahead. And one of the reasons he's ahead, he did not lose his Tech to mass extractors. And of course, now rebuilding on the Rex, Pietros will have his power back very soon. Pietros still power stalling. And once he stops power stalling, actually he's going to have quite a bit of mass. So 8,000 in the bank, so he can get Tech 3 land fairly quickly. One thing that's going to be important is how well Michka can defend his main base here, which isn't really looking that good. He does have important assets, the Tech 2 air HQ. He's got some Tech 2 power. He's rebuilt a couple Tech 2 mass extractors. A lot of his Tech 1 power. But really, the lack of Tech 2 mass extractors for Michka is showing. It is translated into 25 mass per tick advantage for Pietros. And Pietros now, I imagine, has almost solved his power problems. And what we've seen here during this whole time, really no air production whatsoever for Pietros. He was very vulnerable, but Michka did not take advantage. Michka has made some Tech 3 forces, loyalists, very good. And one thing we got to say, that once you get a tech, just like we saw Pietros get the Tech 2 and he had his Ilsha was just sitting there doing nothing. They were very slow to come out and do damage. You don't want to do the same thing with Tech 3. Once you get the Tech 3, you want to put your units to use immediately. And from this position, yep, perfect. A trebuchet here. If you can protect your artillery, you can check out the range. Just park it right here and just start firing away at all the defenses. It's very, very annoying to have one of those shooting at you. And also some engineers. One thing that has really lacked for both players is the engineering. And a good looking tech to air. So it looks like both players putting similar tech to airs. Looks like this one, tech to radar, looks like that one was taken out. Michka still mass stalling like crazy. Now 31,000 reclaim. Imagine Pietros probably is ahead now. Oh, he's got 30,000 as well. Fairly similar. So this Tech 2, Tech 1, Tech 3 force on land will play defense as the trebuchet is going to move into position. And some scouting for Michka. He needs to see that he probably doesn't want to push in here. He needs to just hold the line, protect his trebuchet. Because this is a lot of Ilshevas, and Ilshevas in large numbers are very dangerous to any force. Loyalist 1v1 will take them on, but in large numbers you do not want to take them on. You do not want to take on the Ilshevas. You can use the Loyalists with a little bit of micro. They're a bit quicker. It's a very even battle, but it looks like Cybern will come out ahead, and here come the trebuchets. They will take out the Tech 1 point defenses, and this is where, instead of this force moving in, if it was staying back to protect the trebuchet, which now has a couple loyalists in protection, because really the biggest damage that can be done is from the trebuchet. While Tech 2, well, this is Tech 3 HQ, this would be a great target to take out. We see some emergency Tech 2 point defenses have been built, which will wipe out the rest of this force. As a trebuchet now with 2 kills. Continues to fire away. Elsewhere we've seen absolutely nothing as Michka is building up a defense. More trebuchets and a brick and stealth field plus some flak would really make this much better. As it stands, Pietros knows that there's units here, so he can target them with Tech 1 bombers. Tech 1 bombers, excellent counter, especially Seraphim Tech 1 bombers, 250 damage. You can see it's about 1,000 health here. So 4 bombers easily take out one of those trebuchets. And air control for Pietros. More trebuchets moving in. As we're seeing Tech 3, so some siege tanks from Pietros. As we're now seeing bricks going to work. And bricks, of course, absolutely deadly. As we're seeing dodging action, the dodging trebuchet, excellent work, plus a nice Tech 2 radar. It's going to be some Tech 2 stationary flak. Really no need for stationary flak when you can make mobile flak, but whatever. Looks like that trebuchet will lead another 26 kills. More bombers. One more bomb on that trebuchet and it's done, and that trebuchet needs to stop. I'm not sure what it's doing. This should be a good place to fire its shell. And here would be great. All the build capacity. Any place where there's a lot of units packed in. As loyalists in a brick are rolling through. You can see it's a lot of devastation. Meanwhile, what we got to see is, even though Michka is in a really big assault, he's really neglected upgrading, which is giving him the advantage now. But we are seeing the mass production double for Pietros. So he's still in a very good position. And now the Tech 3 are moving out. Siege tanks, a single brick. And these trebuchets are in trouble. Taking out this TMD would be nice, but of course, do we see cruise missiles? Neglecting cruise missiles is very disappointing for Michka. Good use of Corsairs, but siege tanks. These things are very dangerous in close quarters, and they've really wiped everything out. Big reclaim opportunities. And this last assault, it looked good from far away, but it really didn't do much for Michka. As Michka 34,000 reclaim, totally mass stalling. So his base is way too big for his mass income. This is kind of like in an economy. If you have all this production and all this build capacity, but your money supply is too small, so you have a very deflationary situation. Nobody can get a loan. You need the Federal Reserve. And actually both of these players are in dire needs of the Federal Reserve, which is basically like cheating, but it would give you mass. That way you can take your units, take your engineers, give them resources or money to produce things. And if you're Ron Paul, of course, you would not play with mass extractors at all, because that's cheating. But I think I'm digressing here. So it looks like it's going to be a base here up on this hill. But unfortunately, it's just a single engineer that has no mass. All the mass is going to this Tech 3 factory. And actually, in this situation, what you got to do is you got to realize you got to start upgrading. Because you do not have a tech advantage. You don't really have an advantage. So you got to make the best of what you have. And actually, here it looks like Michka is upgrading again. So he's not that far behind. But you got to maximize your reclaim. Try to catch up. Actually, a couple Tech 2 point defenses up on this hill would look nice. And the result of all those attacks from Michka is really that all these engineers from Pietros are going to get a lot of free mass. And now Michka is in a rather bad position. Although Pietros here, what is going on? Oh wow, okay, chicken. 46,000. So all that reclaim that Pietros is getting, he's going to try to turn into a chicken. And he does not have the power to do it. One thing I just noticed, Michka with huge power. Where did he make the Tech 3 power generator? Or did he? Because with this much power, he can start doing things like Tech 3 air easily. He does have some Tech 2 transports. Those would be nice. As the Tech 3 fight continues here on the bottom, I think Pietros being rather conservative, not attacking. And amazingly, Michka making quite a bit of mass now. I don't understand where the 6,000... Okay, so resource allocation. So the ACU for Michka has resource allocation, making 3,500 power. He's not really using. He's wasting quite a bit of it. But Tech 3 air will be very nice. Now on assault bricks, close range bricks versus the siege tanks really got to use their range. That's where they have the advantage over Seraphim. They want to get close. This is a good looking Tech 1 point defense as well. And perhaps now, yeah, the chicken has been finished by Pietros. And when you're under 1,000 production and you're making a chicken, you really got to rely on reclaim. Because a chicken costs something like, yes, 25,000. So if you have 100 mass income, you're going to use 250 seconds to make one of these, assuming you stop everything else. So it's basically a little over 4 minutes, 4 minutes, 10 seconds. And that's a huge amount of time. So if you make it faster, that means you reclaimed a lot. And now Pietros, 19 kills rolling through. There's really nothing that can be done by Michka to save his main base. He still has a lot of power, and I think here that's his only advantage. He's just basically got to make Tech 3 air and go for the win. He can make Tech 3 air, win air, even maybe use Tech 2 bombers, take out all the power, and then with air control kill this chicken. But he's really running out of time. 58 kills on the Yotha. As Pietros here under 2 Seraphim shields. As long as he's got power, he's going to be very secure. But if you take out power with a couple bombers, you can even go after the ACU. But something must be done, because eventually this will kill everything that Michka has. Yeah, so very bad situation. In this type of situation, what you got to realize is that panicking is not going to help you. So you got to come up with a plan, realize what your options are, and try to execute them. If you're just staring and watching this thing get kills, hoping that something will happen, it won't, unless you're playing in a team with somebody good. But in 1v1s, that's not an option. Pietros taking the time. No, he's not really upgrading. It looks like he's not really doing much at all. He's actually wasting mass and power. 53,000 reclaim. That's the huge difference. 44,000 for Michka, as Michka continues to lose units. However, this Tech 3 force from Michka, this is what he's been doing for the last 10-15 minutes, is actually beginning to get some results. He's got a lot of bricks to protect his trebuchets, which do have a lot of kills, but this is a very slow tactic, and it is much easier to kill things with a chicken than with a Tech 3 force. And this chicken looks like, after doing quite a bit of damage, didn't clean out everything. There's still a lot of engineers and factories left they can go ahead and reclaim, but now this chicken is on its way to wipe out the rest of Michka's bases, and eventually will make it to the ACU, as Michka will finally go for Tech 3 air, as we're now seeing bricks versus the siege tanks. Siege tanks purposely targeting the trebuchets, taking those out. Not good micro from Michka. Should have protected those, because eventually these siege tanks will die. There is a lot of reclaim here. Actually, given that the trebuchets was lost, Michka just needs to take all this and move directly into Pietros' base. Even though there is some point defenses there, he doesn't really have the luxury of time, because this thing's coming. 128 kills. It's only 2 stars so far. Needs another 40 Tech 1 kills to move on. If I was Pietros here, one thing that happens a lot in this game is when you're in this type of position, you feel like you're going to win, and you're wasting resources, is never to do that. Is to build up defenses for your ACU, build up eco. Because so many comebacks, so many times you think this game is won, and then you realize it's not, because maps are big, things are hidden. You never get the full picture. And actually, Michka here, given that he's in so much trouble, perhaps going after the ACU would be a good idea. And actually, if he has air control, which he should, taking all these bricks, building up a bunch of Corsairs, and dropping everything at Pietros' ACU. This is actually one weakness in Pietros' position. He's got a big separation between a fairly good defensive position and his ACU, which is also in a fairly good defensive position. But Pietros does not have the option of combining all of his defenses. So if you transport all of your like 10 bricks plus another 10 Corsairs, Corsairs can snipe the point defenses. The bricks can put enough damage to kill the shields, and maybe even drop in a couple fire beetles. Of course, that option is now a lot more difficult, given that the chicken has taken out the factory. The chicken is now sitting at 232 kills. So we've basically witnessed the chicken running everything over, although we are seeing some strat bombers from Michka. These will take a long time to kill chicken, which is now nearly 100,000 health and regenerating very quickly. It looks like that assault was unsuccessful, although trebuchets going to work. So a lot of trebuchets shells fell into Pietros' base. There just weren't enough. And good play by Pietros, recognizing the situation. He was in quite a bit of trouble when he lost all of his power, but that assault with Tech 3 from Michka, which was defended quite well, Pietros, leaving Pietros all that reclaim, and that reclaim was very quickly turned into an aggressive force. And that's the thing to do. Once you get attacked, realize the situation and what is the fastest way to turn that into something that your enemy can deal with. Michka had that opportunity with having air advantage, with Pietros sitting at 200 power with air. That was something that Pietros just wouldn't be able to handle. And Pietros, having all that mass, made a chicken, and that was something that Michka was not able to handle. Really a very even game. But one of the players recognizing what had to be done. And actually this chicken continues to get bombed. The ACU from Michka is in the water. And now another assault from Pietros. This is something that could have been done a long time ago. And actually sending a chicken alone without an escort is also rather strange. And some point defenses have been hastily made by Michka, which will make this assault a little more difficult, but nothing too problematic for Pietros. He's got numbers. It looks like Michka's base will finally fall. As the chicken is making its way all the way around the world, although coming back home probably not a good option. And one thing about these strike bombers that you've been bombing for a long time, only 2 kills between them, probably not the best target. This chicken is not something you're going to kill, but those strike bombers could have wiped out all the Tech 2 power, until of course there was now Tech 3 anti-air built, and that will take away that option, so these strike bombers will die. But these strats could have really made things difficult for Pietros. So target selection, like in every real-time strategy, extremely important, recognizing why you want a certain unit and what effect it has when you have it or when you lose it. Pietros was some Tech 3 anti-air of his own, and really no more options for Michka. I'm just going to speed this up now. He has nothing except a bunch of loose units, which he shouldn't have, and has only because Pietros is being sloppy. Michka trying to get an upgrade. He does have 13 mass production and 3,500. Pietros does not have Omni, doesn't really have Radar. And that's one thing that Pietros hasn't had, is Tech 3 power, Tech 3 Radar. There's a couple bricks here in the back. Let's see how many kills those have. Yeah, not too many between them. And getting killed by Tech 1 bombers. Pietros asking if this is over, which it is. Really nothing that can be done by Michka. Michka has got Tech 3 and his ACU is making a spider. She's actually making it rather fast. Is he reclaiming? He's just basically reclaiming as much as he can, but amazingly how much engineers he still has. 64,000 reclaimed. Pietros 64,000. So basically dead even. As the chicken now 291 kills. Still being rather sloppy. Michka's almost done with the spider. Spider could be interesting if it was close to the enemy ACU, but it will eventually be found out. And now Tech 3 air for Pietros, and Michka realizing spider is not going to be finished, throws in the towel after 57 minutes. So really enjoyed this one. Hopefully people did as well. Hello and welcome to Summer Duel. We got Chosen versus Congreve. Should be a pretty good game. Was sent to me by one of these players, but pretty sure quite a few people on FAF have already seen this replay. So an excellent map where there's a very short distance between the two starting positions. Of course, the thing that saves you, unlike Winter Duel where there's only one Way to go, now there's 3. Mask tractors fairly spread out. Besides the original 4, you have another 4 which are out on another bigger square, plus another 3, or another 2. They're further away. So you come out to a 10 per side. And there's also quite a bit of reclaim that you can get. Hydro is also rather close, and we're going to see chosen after 2 pigeons to the hydro. And when you go 2 pigeons to the hydro and you don't make air, you're going to have a lot of power. So we'll see how that works out for chosen. Congreve, very similar. 2 pigeons and to the hydro. So unless you make air, you got to make plans on how you're going to use that. Either a quick ACU upgrade, perhaps getting a quick power storage for overcharges, or maybe even upgrading a mask extractor to Tech 2 quickly. But the simplest way is to get Air Factory. And actually with all this reclaim, getting a quick Tech 2. So if you can play all land for a while and secure this reclaim, getting a quick hydro, you can get a Tech 2 mask extractor fast, but that is a dangerous thing to do. I want to map this small radar. More power. So chosen appears to be getting quite a bit of. Looks like he has switched to a second air with his ACU. Alright, so that's what he's going to do. Hydro 3 pigeons, then to air. Then, interestingly, ACU is making air, and the engineer is making a land factory. Meanwhile, 2 versus 1. Both groups do have scouts. Chosen loses his scout. This is going to be very important to defend. There's an engineer here, which was planning on making a wall, but isn't likely to complete it. This Aurora, 2 kills with a scout. Shouldn't have any issues. The scout's coming out for Chosen to take care of the situation. Meanwhile, on the top, we are seeing a force that should have some success. So we're seeing both players sending a stronger force through the top to raid the engineer that would be grabbing all the reclaim. Here, this Aurora just continues to get kills. 4 kills. Engineer, 2 scouts, and Aurora now may take out the mass extractor on the other side. Yeah, this is Aeon and Aeon games here. No contact, just shooting from far away. But so far, good work from Chosen. That's one thing about Chosen. He's always had very good micro. As now we're seeing air. Still no air from Congreve, so what is Congreve doing with his power? Looks like he's just built up his factories very quickly. Building factories also takes quite a bit of power. As his ACU is making his way across, this should be a surprise for Chosen. He is not going to see it, but the 2 ACUs will meet each other. As we've now seen, Congreve take care of the issues up on top. Should send an engineer there. As Congreve finds out he's going to be defended against by the ACU, will pull back to some of his forces. Does not want to just give away the game right away. Interestingly, Chosen going with a flare. That may be a mistake, or he might be thinking about a ghetto. And in terms of production, fairly even, with Congreve slightly ahead. And I'm not really sure what the... Yeah, this mask extractor that was taken out. And a raider in a very good position. As we're seeing another push from Congreve through the top. And a bomber from Chosen. So Chosen should get better recon. Should force some flak out. But he may be out of luck in terms of numbers. And there goes a flare. Flare actually did get a couple of good shots in, but one single Aurora pushes through for Congreve. That'll be a successful raider. No kills yet for Chosen on this bomber. We get his first on an engineer. Taking out that raider would be nice. And yet another bomber coming in. Taking out some flak. As Chosen now forced to retreat all the way back to base. Congreve being very direct. But as these units bunch up, they become perfect targets for the bombers. Looks like this bomber here, only 2 kills, will be taken out. 1 kill and yet another bomber, as this Aurora is going to be a very big nuisance for Chosen. These bombers are pretty much non-stop for Chosen, who has a significant advantage in terms of power, but he's using quite a bit of it. But so far land is winning in terms of map control. On the other side, we're actually seeing a few fervors here for Congreve. Not surprising, there is a point defense for Chosen to retreat to, and Chosen thinking about an upgrade. He's actually getting the gun. He's just started it. He could be in a bit of trouble, unless these bombers just got a lot of kills. 10 kills on one, 3 on the other. So this force could have been a lot bigger. But if Congreve sees that Chosen isn't on upgrade, a couple of these fervors can get in range and start giving a lot of damage to Chosen. Chosen really needs to pick off all that artillery. Congreve slightly less on the health. The bombers continue to do damage. So far the bombers against Aeon have worked quite nicely. And that's the thing, if all you do is make flak, you make your forces a lot weaker. And on a map this small, it's fairly easy to bomb. Another alternative is to take a couple engineers and put a stationary flak right in the middle. But it would have been a better choice for Congreve instead of stationary, or instead of mobile flak, given the map's so small. And now Chosen does have the gun. Let's see which one he's got. He's got the range, so he'll be able to kite Auroras. Make things a lot more difficult for Congreve. Congreve will retreat. Congreve has had superior mass income for most of his game, and has actually taken one of his mass extractor stick too. Now will begin to catch up on power. It's Chosen, still no kills, but this will change here very soon. Also a lot of reclaim opportunities for Chosen, who is now behind on both mass and power. So this upgrade for Chosen really needs to make itself count. Congreve with an upgrade of his own. You can see he was assisting his ACUs, not completely power stalling. Completely destroying his economy as Chosen begins to get kills. The wall looks like will finally be finished for Chosen. Chosen 1000 reclaim, Congreve 1400, so not a significant difference. Congreve nearly done with the upgrade, desperately needs it, making big sacrifices as bombers for Chosen continue to fly. Will take out Radar, and Congreve now still has 1 Radar. Chosen with the bombers has pretty good vision. Actually taking out that mass extractor would be nice. We are now going to see a big conflict in the middle. Big advantage for Chosen in terms of health on the ACUs. Congreve did get the upgrade. He's going to go for the second. He may just cancel this one, or he'll gamble that Chosen will not push. There is no point defense here to retreat to. Congreve will push ahead. See if Congreve got first range, yeah. Or did he get range? No, he got the rate first. So if it's a close range battle, definitely advantage for Congreve, but Chosen can still kite. And more bombers coming in. Chosen is now caught up in terms of mass production, but definitely a big power advantage for Congreve, as Congreve now with the double gun, he's got both range and fire rate, just a little less health. 12 kills, Chosen at 22. Point defense, and a lot of dead units here, but they are in Congreve's base, so Congreve can go ahead and grab those. Stationary point defense on the bottom for Congreve, and a lot of reclaim.
Not really sure if it's a good place for a point defense given that there's a wall here from Chosen. Sure, Congreve doesn't know about it yet, so Chosen is not likely to attack from the bottom. On the top there's also a point defense planned for Congreve. Congreve now finally making an air factory. It's Chosen 30 kills, Congreve 18. Congreve really needs to get a little bit of veterancy to get his health up. But the longer this temporary armistice goes on, the better it is for Congreve. Chosen does have an advantage right now, but he's just really not in a position to use it. Chosen will attempt to get an upgrade, but now finally scouts for Congreve. As Chosen going for Tech to Air, so that should be interesting. The person with less power is going for Tech to Air. And at Chosen here about a quarter and he's going to cancel. So significant disadvantage now for Chosen. He threw away quite a bit of resources. And now he's about to lose his force, leaving a huge amounts of reclaim for Congreve. Congreve at 2,700 reclaim. Chosen only 1,300. Already 1,300 advantage, which will get a lot bigger here shortly. As Chosen attacking through the top, but a point defense finished just in time. No artillery yet in position for Chosen. As Congreve pushes a lot of his forces up top to play defense. Congreve and Chosen just going at it. Some overcharges. See any Tech 2 yet? We see Tech 2 land. So Tech 2 land versus Tech 2 air. This will give both players the opportunity to make some Tech 2 engineers, which will make Tech 2 point defenses on this map. The Tech 2 point defense, Tech 2 shields, cruise missiles are all very good tools. Congreve putting a Tech 2 point defense directly in the middle of his base. I'll actually speed this up. I don't think I will miss much since it's just a battle up the middle so far. Tech 2 point defense, TMD, and then Tech 2 power. And gunships now for Chosen. Chosen getting yet another factory, another air factory. On a map that is this small, defending against gunship isn't that difficult, and it can be done with Tech to flak, which Congreve already has. So Chosen is going for something that's already countered. I think Mercies would be a pretty good option if you could get Congreve to get into a battle in the middle, with Congreve already a bit low on health and surprising. Congreve with a few mercies. Especially, well, actually Congreve knows there's Tech to air, so that should make him a bit reluctant to push ahead with his ACU. But it does look like Congreve is going to play defensive. He's already got 3 Tech to mass extractors. He's about to get Tech to power. In terms of upgrades, Chosen is a bit behind. He's got 2 Tech to mass extractors. Still making gunships. As Chosen pushes ahead, now Obsidian's coming out for Congreve. Mobile missile launchers on a map like this are extremely potent. They will counter Tech to point defenses and will push another player all the way back to the other side. As Tech to point defense is beginning to go to work, Chosen continues to push, but really with his forces he's not in position to win this. Unless here he had a couple of mercies, you probably throw those in. With the gamble gunships now coming in, but we're gonna see those disappear very quickly. Let's see, that flak doesn't mess around. He did kill a Tech 2 engineer, that's about it. As Chosen is going to go down fairly low in health, Tech to point defenses. 2 more shots and Chosen is dead, but it looks like he just got outside the range. So Chosen playing very dangerously, using something that was not going to work, and it didn't. There's an Obsidian up on top. against much weaker forces will clean up, and huge amounts of reclamation available for Congreve here. Come up minute 17, 6,000 reclaim for Congreve. He's got 800 in the bank. He can continue to upgrade. Plenty of power, is basically doubling Chosen on power, and only 1,600 for Chosen. And this is where aggression isn't always good on Obsidian. Will be countered by gunships. You just need to, if you're Congreve, you just put flak, spread it out, 3 or 4 flak around the field, and you're set. Some engineers for Chosen. And this is, I guess, on a small map like this, when you fall behind, you are in a bit of trouble. You're kind of limited with options, because there's only so many ways you can attack. And when you make a mistake, another player defends well, and you feed him mass, it's really quite difficult. You can get into a mode where you're just waiting to die. So the way to beat that is to be more aggressive, and something like gunships raiding the outside mass extractors, minimizing how much free mass you give to the enemy, and allow the enemy to make some mistakes. Let the enemy feed you. Maybe they'll be in a giving mood. But really, if Congreve plays perfectly, doesn't make mistakes, he should be able to win this game. But let's see if he does make some mistakes. The gunships retreat, and an air battle that actually Chosen might win. And sniping this tech to power would be nice with some cruise missiles if you could take out that TMD. And actually, if you go onto the Tech 2 land stage, which most players are there, mobile missile launchers can occupy an Aeon TMD quite easily. And that's kind of ridiculous, this engineer getting a very advanced Tech 2 mask extractor, or Tech 1 mask extractor, gets promptly killed. Raider in the middle for Congreve. That is definitely a big advantage. You can see if anything is going anywhere, and actually he's going to see gunships going on a raid. That's 400 mass here. We'll take out Tech 1 mask extractor. And it looks like this will precipitate a battle. Actually, those gunships are going to die. And what Congreve sees right now is nothing up top. So you can put a bunch of units here. You can actually put some artillery up top, or some mobile missile launchers here, and he can attack Chosen's base. Or he can go here. He sees all those walls. You just got to shoot over them. And he's got plenty of firepower in the middle. A lot of obsidians. Chosen has cut up on power. He's close on mass. Chosen is definitely in attacking mode. Chosen now, not really sure what upgrade he's getting. This is something I've seen before. Looks like he's getting the shield, but I can't really tell if he's actually using any power. So this could be a bug or something along those lines. Looks like he's cancelled it. Maybe it's not a bug. When you're low on mass, you get in the shield, you're just not using too much power. As this has been a big push from Congreve with all those obsidians, but against an ACU that can overcharge, that was perhaps a mistake. So this could have been, I think this could be the mistake that Chosen needed from Congreve. A lot of free mass without actually causing any damage. It did cause Chosen to stop his upgrade, but that didn't matter. He can probably get it even faster now, as we're now seeing swift winds from Congreve and the second tech to power. And more obsidians in the middle. Chosen will now get a shield. And here he can actually take this. This is a significant amount of mass, and just try to out-tech Congreve. And both players can try to deny some of these side mass extractors. There's a lone bomber with 3 kills. Gets 5 kills before it's just gonna die. Chosen this entire game has been more aggressive with bombers. But as it stands, he is significantly behind. Congreve 9400 reclaim. Chosen 3600, and he's about to get quite a bit more. And in this position, if you have this much reclaim, perhaps rushing a Tech 3 mass extractor might be a good idea. It'd be a big risk, but I think Chosen here needs to take some risks. As now gunships from Congreve. Congreve feeling that he's got way more air. Actually here big numbers. Those swift ones are quite expensive, so quite a bit of mass from Congreve invested in the air. As the gunship for Congreve takes out, or nearly takes out, a mass extractor. As bombers here freely bombing. 9 kills on that bomber. And a Tech 2-point defense for Congreve in the middle. And both players in the mass storage stage. And gunships for Congreve. Congreve will recycle his factories. He'll work with 2 Tech 2s, 1 Tech 1, and a Tech 2 air. And obsidians here on, oh wow, this is artillery, so this will be interesting. Not a unit you want to lose if you're Chosen. A very expensive unit. You can see one of these is 2000 mass, so the same as 2 Tech 2 mass extractors, or 4 Tech 2 point defense. So this is a lot more expensive than one of these, and has a superior range. Mobile shields for Chosen to try to protect it. So this will definitely have to do damage to justify the cost. I'm not really sure what it's shooting at. It does have 3 kills. I think Chosen is probably going to have to target that. And you can see the range. He can take out... it's just a Tech 2 factory. With this splash, he might be able to get that Tech 2 power. He's just outside the range of this Tech 2 power and the TMDs. And a lot of bombers being built up by Congreve. He might try to go for a snipe. But it would take 10 bombers in one pass to try to kill that. This Chosen really has cut up in terms of economy. Still a slight disadvantage. But Tech 3 and a third Tech 2 power generator for Congreve. Now going for Tech 3 land. And at the same time he's just pushed in. It looks like he's going to win this battle. He will deny the miasma, but he will give up quite a few obsidians. This will be very nice wrecks for Chosen. So you can't really say who's the winner there. I think that miasma was effective to a degree, just didn't have the range. But having all this reclaim for Chosen will be nice. And I'm still surprised that we haven't seen any mobile missile launchers. I think they would have been a bit more effective than that miasma you could have had. Actually, no. I'll take it back. Here they are. Each one of these is about 160 mass instead of 2000 mass. You could get about 15 of those, and 15 mobile missile launchers will definitely affect the battle. But here come the Harbies. This is where the ACU for Chosen will have to do damage. As the Evan Songs are going to be dodging. Taken out by Chosen's Air Force. This Chosen once again really falls behind in terms of mass production. But in terms of reclaim, imagine he's should be cut up. 800 reclaim. Power stalling. When you're power stalling, those obsidians are a lot weaker. 11,000 reclaim for Congreve.
And here is the Harvey. Harvey does have the quickness and the range on the obsidian, as the mobile missile launchers continue to do damage. See, yep, 2 Harveys and then artillery for Congreve. Chosen has also got Tech 3. He's got a nice looking shield. He's getting yet another power, Tech to power. But 2 Harveys through the top. But this is 10 obsidians here, plus 2 Harveys. So if Congreve makes the mistakes of moving in, this could be some nice reclaim opportunities for Chosen. And actually the ACU here for Chosen might be in a good position to take those out, as the Harveys are beginning to eat some point defense fire. They do reclaim the walls, but I think this is where Congreve is going to realize he was a bit too late. 1 Harvey dies. And now it is very even. Mobile missile launchers versus Tech 3 artillery. See Chosen moving his MMLs back and forth. On the other side, a Harvey breaks through. It's Chosen being very safe. And he does have a whole bunch of cruise missile launchers. So 3 cruise missile launchers. He might be thinking about sniping the ACU. Definitely a good idea if you have a whole bunch of mobile missile launchers. And here the Harvey needs to move back. Looks like he won't. Total domination by Chosen up on top. In the middle, mobile missile launchers attacking the Serenity. Serenities, of course, can move around and shoot. And up top, I think this force could have pushed up. Oh no, Congreve here will go to the top to counter. As Harvey's now got really close to the MMLs, will kill all the mobile missile launchers, and one of the Harveys will die. And we're now seeing cruise missiles, and I'm not really sure what happened here. Why is there... Oh, this is, well, this is what happened. Tech 3 artillery taking out Tech 2 power. A really big loss for Chosen. It's really what you want to do with the Tech 3 stage. Move up with Arty and protect it with your Tech 3 units. As Obsidian's now moving through. 2 Harveys and about 10 Obsidians. They're moving back up, given that the AC for Congreve has moved back. And one big difference recently is that the ACU for Chosen really hasn't done anything. As now the Obsidians parking just a bit too close are going to take a bunch of damage. Literally about 6 unanswered kills. Significant amount of reclaim. Chosen once again power stalling pretty hard. But now with 5,000 in the bank, 13,000 reclaim, Tech 3 mass extractor's got to be in his mind. He's actually now finally overtaken Congreve. Chosen pausing his ACU. Looks like he is getting the back upgrade. It's got to be the shield. He's got a lot of mobile shields. Congreve nearly 1,000 advantage, so in these battles mobile shields could make the difference, and mobile shields do cost a lot of power, and that's where Congreve is ahead given the superior damage from the Serenity. And here 1 Harvey moves in, will be outnumbered, will turn into a nice wreck, as we're now seeing cruise missiles being fired, but they're for the most part being defended. I don't think they actually got any kills. Up on top, this is where these Obsidians and Harveys, if they attacked a lot earlier, would have been a lot better. I think they could have even attacked the ACU, because ACUs can take a lot of damage, but this is a very late attack, and the result is going to be that there's no more force for Chosen up top.
which will allow Congreve to push through the top, and will also give him a lot of really good reclaim. So perhaps a mistake there from Chosen. Chosen still power stalling, actually not producing anything. Cruise missile launchers do have some kills, but I don't believe they actually got any significant targets. Tech 2 mask extractors, we should actually look if there's anything that's Tech 3. In terms of Tech 2, we're seeing six with 6 of them capped with mass storage. And Chosen sitting on 4, and has actually lost one mask structure he hasn't rebuilt yet, and has taken some artillery fire. It almost seems like Chosen is attempting to use cruise missiles to defend against mobile missile launchers, shooting Tech 1 Raiders with missiles, shooting at shields with missiles, and this is a lot of artillery now for Congreve. One volley from these will do a significant amount of damage. Chosen attempting to get the back shield. See, he's using up quite a bit of power. For whatever reason, we can't really see it on the ACU. More power for Congreve, and actually both players exactly the same in terms of power. A defense front for Chosen up on top. Interestingly, nothing has happened on the bottom, and in the middle it's for the most part been Congreve. Has Chosen his finished upgrade. I'm not sure if it was actually, I think it was the shield. No, he's got resource allocation. Oh, so now he's making huge amounts of power, so he can spam shields all day. See, he's now doubling the power production of Congreve. And here space is actually a big issue, so getting resource allocation could be a good idea. He can, instead of making tech to power, which he's now reclaiming, he can make some shields. And Chosen now starting a GC here, minute 37. See how long it takes Congreve to realize that. He's just scouted, so he had to have seen it. Although it's he'd have to go over here and look to see. Still just making tech to power. I imagine we're going to see a big shield spam. There's 2 Tech 2 factories, actually 3, and a Tech 3 factory, and one of these could just be making shields all day for Chosen, especially given that he is under fairly heavy fire here. This Harvey's gonna, well, actually he dodged most of that. This will be something that Chosen will have to respect. He will pull back all of his forces, and still a lot of Obsidians, which could be a surprise. Obsidians fairly slow and don't have the range, so they're really not that effective in these situations, unless Congreve makes a mistake and the Obsidians can get close. I think making shields until you can't do it anymore because of power problems would be the best way to go. Shields and Harveys. It's here instead of a couple of these Obsidians, a couple shields would be very nice. As we're seeing numbers for Congreve, it's just going to be a massacre. A total massacre, and a line of artilleries for Congreve here, minute 40, as Chosen is going to lose his shield. He's only about 20% on that GC. Cruise missiles for Chosen. This has been a total loss now for Chosen. All he's got now is the tech to point defenses, and he will move out with his ACU. He will risk a rather weak ACU against a very strong force. He will let his Tech 3 engineer work on the GC. We're not seeing any GCs from Congreve. He probably doesn't feel like he needs to. He just needs to get enough artillery shells on Chosen's base, or he needs to just kill Chosen. Here, snipers might be a good idea. And Chosen reclaiming his dead units, so playing very dangerously, and actually given a huge air advantage from Congreve, he could just punish Chosen here and end the game. This really isn't something that Chosen should be able to do this late in the game, given the mercy threat. Chosen now will walk back. He's about a third of the way on the GC. And the force for Congreve continues to get bigger and bigger. Got about 10 Harbies, 4 artilleries. And you can see anything that's not under a shield is under heavy fire. As Congreve gets just a bit too close to the tech-to-point defenses, this is one thing he does not want to do. As we're seeing cruise missiles actually knocking down a lot of those shields. And a mistake there from Congreve. He got way too close. And actually that was a bit of a disaster for Congreve. There's no reason for him to fight this close. He can just park his arty here and shoot across. See the range on the artillery if he's got any left. This is plenty. If he could even push back and just fire away at this position, take out the tech-to-point defenses, take out the Tech 3 factory, take out the GC, and then just stay here with the Harbies. You can see Chosen, this is about as much range as he has. In this position, Chosen is now pretty much defenseless. He will have to push out with the ACU. And this is where mercies would end the game if Congreve made any. Up top we see Harby rolling through. But tech-to-point defense here on the weak side should be able to take care of it. We're also seeing Absolver here, an anti-shield. As the very brave engineers from Congreve trying to steal some mass from Chosen. They will be punished. Although they did get actually quite a bit. And the reclaimed department, we're now seeing 25,000 for Chosen. Congreve sitting on 19,000, it's now about 6,000 advantage. As Chosen is taking damage from a sniper and an absolver. And this GC is now 3/4 done. And if that GC gets finished, that will make things extremely interesting. And Congreve still not making a GC. And in terms of upgrading, he is now going to go for a Tech 3 mass extractor. He got a Tech 3 power, so he's now way ahead of Chosen. Chosen has had to sacrifice all of his Tech 2 powers, now just living on resource allocation, getting hit. A mobile missile launcher spam from Chosen. And these point defenses here, critical, are under fire. Chosen, these shields really getting countered nicely by that absolver. As these Harbies getting just a bit too close. And a mercy shot from Chosen, trying to take out artillery. Has 13 kills on this point defense. Another one here that was very effective has been destroyed. Chosen picks it up for reclaim. If that point defense dies, that means the Harbies can move up a bit closer. The point defense is dead. So now Congreve can go ahead and kill everything. He can get as close as he wants. He has only 2 artilleries left, so he actually doesn't have that much firepower. Chosen will push up a great overcharge, take out a couple of Harbies. That should earn him some respect. And yet another overcharge, knocking down some shields. Sniper here with 5 kills. It's absolver. Chosen really showing that Tech 3 land is very well countered by the Aeon ACU with range and a couple overcharges. But of course that ACU this late in the game, 47 minutes, no excuse for it not to be killed by air. As Chosen continues to reclaim, So all these recent battles, Chosen has been the beneficiary of all that reclaim. And finally now a GC is going to be started by Congreve. He's realizing there's really no way around this. And Congreve doubling both mass and power production of Chosen. But if Chosen can get this GC quick, get it out before this GC for Congreve, although Congreve with a lot of build capacity, looks like he's paused his Tech 3 production. Perhaps if Chosen builds it, then it doesn't attack and Congreve makes a mistake. But seeing the ACU here on the front line, it's as if Congreve is really playing it safe. He's not going to be making any rash decisions. Things like mercies. He's just went ahead and got himself a couple Tech 3 mass extractors. He will recycle some old units. As Chosen really getting pushed back, and the GC for Chosen 30,000 reclaimed, Congreve 20,000. Still quite a bit of reclaim left for both players. And this GC nearly done, and GC together with shields could be quite nice. Minute 48. GC is finished for Chosen. Congreve more than halfway done, and his GC is recycling some Tech 2 power, trying to get that GC out quicker. And it'll be a sprint. If Chosen can get across and put some fire on this GC before it's finished. Although it's not looking like he might do that. Looks like Congreve started this GC just in time. Although there is a lot of shields. And Congreve also has quite a few shields. It will come down to micro, but definitely an advantage for Congreve, assuming he finishes this. He will sacrifice a couple Aeon NGs. Something that you don't see very often, the sacrifice. And the GC is finished. They will now fire at each other. And there is a big advantage for Congreve. Of course, he's got a lot more Harbies, which are making a big difference. Chosen will now walk directly into the base. He will go after Congreve's ACU. Perhaps this is what he should have done immediately. Just walk past this GC. Congreve will actually get take some damage. But now this is a very nice chunk of mass for Congreve to reclaim. And pretty much nothing that Chosen can do about it. So after 50 minutes, this is basically over. It's a game that Congreve controlled most of the way. We saw air versus land, where the bombers were quite effective for Chosen, but the map control really worked out for Congreve. As Chosen dies minute 51. So hopefully people enjoyed this. In the ravine. The village of Congreve lay in a ravine, so that only the belfry and the chimneys of the cotton mills could be seen from the high road and the railway station. When visitors asked what village this was, they were told, "That's the village where the high priest ate all the caviar at the funeral." It had happened at a funeral feast in the house of the manufacturer Chekhov that the old high priest saw among the savory some large-grained caviar and began eating it greedily. People nudged him, tugged at his sleeve, but he seemed petrified with enjoyment, felt nothing, and only went on eating. He ate up all the caviar, and there was some 4 pounds in the jar. And years had passed since then, and the high priest had long been dead, but the caviar was still remembered. Well, life was so poor here, or people had not been clever enough to notice anything but the unimportant incident that occurred 10 years before. Anyway, the people had nothing else to tell about the village of Congreve. The village was never free from fever, and the mud was thick even in the summer, especially near the fences, over which hung old willow trees and gave deep shade.
Here there was always a smell from the factory refuse and the acetic acid which was used in the manufacturing of the calico. The 3 cotton mills and the tan yard were not in the village itself, but a little way off. They were small plants, and no more than 400 workmen were employed in all of them. The tan yard often made the water in the little river stink. The refuse contaminated the meadows, the peasants' cattle suffered from anthrax, and the tan yard was ordered closed. It was considered to be closed, but went on working in secret, with the convenience of the local police officer and district doctor, each of whom was paid 10 rubles a month by the owner. In the whole village there were only 2 decent houses, built of brick with iron roofs. One of them was occupied by the district government office. In the other, a 2-storied house just opposite the church, lived Grigory Petrovich Tsibukin, a townsman who hailed from Yepifan. Grigory kept a grocery, but that was only for the sake of appearances. In reality, he sold vodka, cattle, hides, grain, and pigs. He traded in anything that came to hand, and when, for instance, magpies were wanted abroad for ladies' hats, he made 30 kopecks for every pair of birds. He brought timber for felling, lent money at interest, and altogether was a resourceful man. He had 2 sons. The elder, Anisim, served in the police as a detective and was rarely home. The younger, Stepan, had gone in for trade and helped his father, but no great help was expected of him, as he was weak in health and deaf. His wife, Aksinya, a handsome woman with a good figure, who wore a hat and carried a parasol on holidays, got up early and went to bed late, and ran about all day long, picking up her skirts and jiggling her keys, going from the warehouse to the cellar and from there to the shop, and old Tsibukin looked at her good-humoredly while his eyes glowed, and at such moments he regretted she had not been married to his elder son instead of the younger, who was deaf, and obviously no judge of female beauty. The old man had always had an inclination for family life, and he loved his family more than anything on earth, especially his elder son, the detective, and his daughter-in-law. Aksinya had no sooner married the deaf son than she began to display an extraordinary gift for business, and knew who could be allowed to run up a bill and who could not. She kept the keys, and would not trust them even to her husband. She rattled away at the abacus, looked at horses' teeth like a peasant, and was always laughing or shouting, and whatever she did or said, the old man was simply delighted, and muttered, "Well done, daughter, well done, my beauty." He had been a widower, but a year after his son's marriage he could not resist getting married himself. A girl was found for him in a village 20 miles from Congreve, Varvara Nikolaevna by name, no longer young, but good-looking, comely, and coming from a decent family. No sooner had she moved into a little room in the upper story than everything in the house seemed to brighten up, as though new glass had been put into all the windows. The lamps gleamed before the icons, the tables were covered with snow-white cloths, plants with red buds made their appearance in the windows, and in the front garden, and at dinner, instead of eating from a single bowl, each person had a separate plate set for him. Varvara Nikolaevna had a pleasant, friendly smile, and it seemed as though the whole house was smiling too. Beggars and pilgrims, male and female, began to come into the yard, a thing which had never happened in the past. The plaintive sing-song voices of the Ukleva peasant women and the apologetic coughs of weak, seedy-looking men who had been dismissed from the factory for drunkenness were heard under the windows. Varvara helped them with money, with bread, with old clothes, and afterwards, when she felt more at home, began taking things out of the shop. One day the deaf man saw her take 4 ounces of tea, and that disturbed him. "Here, mother's taken 4 ounces of tea," he informed his father afterwards. "Where is that to be entered?" The old man made no reply, but stood still and thought a moment, moving his eyebrows, and then went upstairs to his wife. "Varvarushka, if you want anything out of the shop," he said affectionately, "take it, my dear, take it, and welcome. Don't hesitate." And the next day the deaf man, running across the yard, called to her, "If there's anything you want, mother dear, help yourself." There was something new, something happy and light-hearted in her alms-giving, just as there was in the lamps before the icons and in the red flowers. When on the eve of a fast, or during the local church festival, which lasted 3 days, they palmed off on the peasants tainted salt meat, smelling so strong that it was hard to stand near the tub of it, and took scythes, caps, and their wives' handkerchiefs in pledge from the drunken man. When the factory hands, stupefied with bad vodka, lay rolling in the mud, and sin seemed to hover thick like fog in the air, then it was a relief to think that up there in the house there was a gentle, neatly dressed woman who had nothing to do with the salt meat or vodka. Her charity had in those oppressive murky days the effect of a safety valve on a machine. The days in the Zabukin's house were busy ones. Before the sun was up, Aksenia was snorting, and she washed in the outer room, and the samovar was boiling in the kitchen with a hum that boded no good. Old Grigory Petrovitch, dressed in a long black jacket, cotton breeches, and shiny top boots, looking a dapper little figure, walked about the room, stepping with his little heels like the father-in-law in a well-known song. The shop was opened. When it was daylight, a racing droshky was brought up to the front door, and the old man got jauntily into it, pulling his big cap down to his ears, and looking at him no one would have said he was 56. His wife and daughter-in-law saw him off, and at such times, when he had on a good clean coat and a huge black stallion that had cost him 300 rubles was harnessed to the droshky, the old man did not like the peasants to come up to him with the complaints and petitions. He hated the peasants and disdained them, and if he had some peasants waiting at the gates, he would shout angrily, "Why are you standing there? Move on." Or if a beggar, he would cry, "God will provide." He would drive off on business. His wife, in a dark dress and a black apron, tidied the rooms or helped in the kitchen. Aksenia attended to the shop, and from the yard could be heard the clink of bottles and of money, her laughter and loud talk, and the angry voices of customers who she had offended, and at the same time it could be seen that illicit sale of vodka was already going on in the shop. The deaf man sat in the shop too, or walked about the streets bareheaded, with his hands in his pockets, looking absent-mindedly now at the houses, now at the sky overhead. 6 times a day they had tea. 4 times a day they sat down to meals. And in the evening they counted their takings, put them down, went to bed, and slept soundly. All the 3 cotton mills in Congreve were connected by telephone with the houses of their owners, Hrumin seniors, Hrumin juniors, and Kostikov. A telephone was installed in the government office too, but it soon went out of order when it started to swarm with bugs and cockroaches. The district elder was semi-literate and wrote every word in the official documents with a capital. But when the phone went out of order, he said, "Yes, now we shall be badly off without a telephone." The Hrumin seniors were continually at law with the juniors, and sometimes the juniors quarreled among themselves and went to law, and their mill did not work for a month or 2 till they were reconciled again. And this was an entertainment for the people of Congreve, as there was a great deal of talk and gossip on the occasion of each quarrel. On holiday, Kostikov and the juniors would go driving, and they would dash about Congreve and run down calves. Aksenia, dressed to kill and rustling her starched petticoats, used to promenade up and down the street near her shop, and juniors would snatch her up and carry her off as though by force. Then old Zabukin too would drive out to show his new horse, and he would take Varvara with him. In the evening after these drives, when people were going to bed, an expensive concertina was played in the juniors' yard, and if the moon was shining, those strains thrilled the heart, and Congreve no longer seemed like a wretched hole. The elder son, Anisim, came home very rarely, only on great holidays, but he was often sent by a returning villager large presents and letters written by someone else in a very beautiful hand, always on a sheet of foolscap that looked like a formal petition. The letters were full of expressions that Anisim never made use of in conversation. "Dear Papa and Mama, I send you a pound of orange Pekoe tea for the satisfaction of your physical needs." At the bottom of every letter was scratched, as though with a broken pen, "Anisim Zabukin," and again in the same excellent hand, "Agent." The letters were read aloud several times, and the old father, touched red with emotion, would say, "Here he did not care to stay at home. He has gone in for a learned profession. Well, let him go his way, every man to his own trade." It happened that just before Carnival there was a heavy rain mixed with sleet. The old man and Varvara went to the window to look at it, and lo and behold, Anisim drove up in a sledge from the station. He was quite unexpected. He came indoors, looking anxious and troubled about something, and he remained the same for the rest of his stay. There was something jaunty in his manner. He was in no haste to go away, and it looked as though he had been dismissed from the service. Varvara was pleased to see him. She kept looking at him with a sly expression, sighing and shaking her head. "How is this, my friends?" she said. "The lad's in his 28th year, and he's still leading a happy bachelor life." From the adjacent room her soft, even speech continued to sound like tut-tut-tut. She began whispering with her husband and Aksinya, and their faces too assumed a sly and mysterious expression, as though they were conspirators. It was decided to marry Anisim. "The younger brother has long been married," said Varvara, "and you still without a helpmate, like a cock at the fair. What is the meaning of it?" "You will be married, please God. Then as you choose. You can go into the service, and your wife will remain here at home to help us. There is no order in your life, young man, and I see you have forgotten how to live properly. All of you townspeople are sinners." Since the Tsubukkins were rich, the prettiest girls were chosen as brides for them. For Anisim, too, they found a handsome one. He was himself of an uninteresting and inconspicuous appearance. Of a weak and sickly constitution and short stature, he had full puffy cheeks, which looked as though he was blowing them out. There was a sharp look in his unblinking eyes. His beard was red and scanty, and when he was thinking, he always put it in his mouth and bit it. Moreover, he drank, and that was noticeable from his face and his walk. But when he was informed that they had found a very beautiful bride for him, he said, "Oh well, I'm not a fright myself. All of us Tsubukkins are handsome, I must say." The village of Terguevo was near the town. Half of it had lately been incorporated into the town, the other half remained a village. In the first half there was a widow living in her own little house. She had a sister living with her who was quite poor and went out to work by the day. And the sister had a daughter called Lipa, a girl who went out to work too. People in Terguevo were already talking about Lipa's good looks, but her terrible poverty put everyone off. People opined that only some widower or an elderly man would marry her in spite of her poverty, or perhaps take her to himself without marriage, and that her mother would get enough to eat living with her. Varvara heard about Lipa from the matchmakers, and she drove over to the Terguevo. Then a proper visit of inspection was arranged at the house of the girl's aunt, and with refreshments and wine, and Lipa wore a new pink dress made on purpose for this occasion, and a crimson ribbon like a flame gleamed in her hair. She was pale, thin, and frail, with soft, delicate features, sunburnt from working in the open air. A shy, mournful smile always hovered about her face, and there was a childlike look in her eyes, trustful and curious. She was young, still a child. Her bosom was scarcely perceptible, but she could be married because she had reached the legal age. She really was beautiful, and the only thing that might be thought unattractive was her big masculine hands, which hung idle now like two big claws. "There is no dowry, but we don't mind that," said Tsubukkin to the aunt. "We took a wife from a poor family for our son Stepan, too. Now we can't say too much for her. In the house and in the shop alike, she has hands of gold." Lipa stood in the doorway and looked as though she would say, "Do with me as you will, I trust you." While her mother, Praskovia, the charwoman, hid in the kitchen, numb with shyness. At one time in her youth, a merchant whose floor she was scrubbing stamped at her in a rage. She went chill with terror, and there was always a feeling of fear at the bottom of her heart. And that fear made her arms and legs tremble and her cheeks twitch. Sitting in the kitchen, she tried to hear what the visitors were saying, and she kept crossing herself, pressing her fingers to her forehead, and gazing at the icons. Anisim, slightly drunk, would open the door into the kitchen and say in a free and easy way, "Why are you sitting here, precious mamma? We are dull without you." And Praskovia, overcame with timidity, pressing her hands to her lean wasted bosom, would say, "Oh, not at all. It's very kind of you, sir." After the visit of inspection, the wedding day was fixed. Then Anisim walked about the rooms at home whistling, or subtly thinking of something, would fall to brooding, and would look at the floor fixedly, silently, as though he would probe to the depths of the earth. He expressed neither pleasure that he was to be married so soon the week after Easter, nor a desire to see his bride, but simply went on whistling. And it was evident that he was only getting married because his father and stepmother wished him to, and because it was the village custom to marry off the son in order to have a woman to help in the house. When he went away he seemed in no haste, and behaved altogether not as he had done on previous visits. He was unusually jaunty, and talked inappropriately. In the village of Shikalova lived 2 dressmakers, sisters belonging to the Flagellant sect. The new clothes for the wedding were ordered from them, and they often came to try them on, and stayed long while drinking the tea. They were making for Varvara a brown dress with black lace and bugles on it, and for Axinia a light green dress with a yellow front and train. When the dressmakers had finished their work, Tsubbukin paid them not in money, but in goods from the shop, and they went away depressed, carrying parcels of tallow candles and tins of sardines, which they did not in the least need. And when they got out of the village in the open country, they sat down on a hillock and cried. Anisim arrived 3 days before the wedding, rigged out in new clothes from top to toe. He had dazzling India rubber galoshes, and instead of a cravat wore a red cord with little balls on it. And over his shoulder he had hung an overcoat, also new, without putting his arms into the sleeves. After crossing himself sedately before the icon, he greeted his father and gave him 10 silver rubles and 10 half rubles. To Varvara he gave as much, and to Axinia 20 quarter rubles. The chief charm of the present lay in the fact that all the coins, as though carefully matched, were new and glittered in the sun. Trying to seem grave and sedate, he screwed up his face and puffed out his cheeks, and he smelled of spirits. He must have visited the refreshments bar at every station. And again there was something free and easy about the man, something superfluous and out of place. Then Anisim had a bite and drank tea with the old man, and Varvara kept turning the new coins over in her hands and inquired about villagers who had gone to live in the town. "They are all right, thank God. They got on quite well," said Anisim. "Only something has happened to Ivan Yegorov. His old woman, Sofia Nikiforovna, is dead of consumption. They ordered the memorial dinner for the peace of her soul from the confectioner's, and 2.5 rubles a head. And there was wine. There were peasants from our village, and Yegorov paid 2.5 rubles for them too. They didn't eat anything, though. What does a peasant understand about sauces?" 2.5 rubles, said his father, shaking his head. "Well, it's not like the country here. You go into a restaurant to have a snack. You order one thing and another. A crowd collects. You have a drink. And before you know it, it's daylight, and you have 3 or 4 rubles each to pay. And when you are with Samarodov, he likes to have coffee with cognac in the evening. And after cognacs is 60 kopecks a little glass." "And he's making it all up," said the old man delightedly. "He's making it all up. I'm always with Samarodov now. It's Samarodov who writes my letters to you. He writes splendidly. And if I were to tell you, Mama," Anisim went on happily, addressing Varvara, "the sort of fellow that Samarodov is, you would not believe me. We call him Mukhtar because he's black like an Armenian. I can see through him. I know all his affairs as well as I know my 5 fingers on my hand. And he feels that. He always follows me about. We're as thick as thieves. He seems to not like it, in a way, but he can't get on without me. Where I go, he goes. I have a true sharp eye, Mama. I see a peasant selling a shirt at a rag fair. See, that shirt was stolen, and really it turns out to be so. The shirt was stolen." "How can you tell?" asked Varvara. "I just know it. I have an eye for it. I know nothing about the shirt, only for some reason I seem drawn to it. It's stolen, and that's all I can say. The boys in the department have got a saying, 'Oh, Anisim has gone to shoot a snipe.' That means looking for stolen goods. Yes, anybody can steal, but it is another thing to keep what you've stolen. The earth is wide, but there is no place on it to hide stolen goods." "A ram and 2 ewes were carried off from Gunturov's last week," said Varvara, and she heaved a sigh. "And there is no one to try and find him." The day of the wedding arrived. It was a cool but bright, cheerful April day. Since early morning people were driving about the Congreve in carriages drawn by a team of 2 or 3 horses, the bells jiggling and happy ribbons decorating the yokes and manes. The rooks, disturbed by this activity, were crawling noisily in the willows, and startling sang their loudest unceasingly as though rejoicing that there was a wedding at the Tsubukins. Indoors, the tables were already loaded with long fish, smoked hams, stuffed fowls, boxes of sprats, pickled savories of various sorts, and many bottles of vodka and wine. There was a smell of smoked sausage and of sour lobster. Old Tsubukin walked about near the tables, tapping his heels and sharpening the knives against each other. They kept calling Varvara and asking her for things, and she, breathless and distraught, was constantly running in and out of the kitchen, where the man cook from Kostikov's and a woman cook employed by Hrumin Juniors had been at work since early morning. Aksenia, with her hair curled and her stays without her dress on, in new creaky boots, flew about the yard like a whirlwind, showing glimpses of her bare knees and bosom. It was noisy. There was a sound of scolding and oaths. Passers-by stopped at wide-open gates, and in everything there was a feeling that something extraordinary was happening. "They have gone for the bride." The carriage bells jingled and died away far beyond the village. Between 2 and 3 o'clock, people ran up. Again there was a jingling of bells. They were bringing the bride. The church was full. A candelabra was lighted, and the choir was singing from music books as old Tsubukin had wished it. The glare of the lights and the bright-colored dresses dazzled Lipa. She felt as though the singers with their loud voices were hitting her on the head with hammers. The stays, which she had put on for the first time in her life, her shoes pinched her, and her face looked as though she had only just come to herself after fainting. She gazed about without understanding. Anisim, in his black coat with a red cord instead of a tie, stared at the same spot, lost in thought, and at every loud burst of singing hurriedly crossed himself. He felt touched and disposed to weep. This church was familiar to him from earliest childhood. At one time his dead mother used to bring him here to take the sacrament. At one time he used to sing in the choir. Every icon he remembered so well, every corner. Here he was being married. He had to take a wife for the sake of doing the proper thing, but he was not thinking of that now. He had somehow forgotten his wedding completely. Tears dimmed his eyes so that he could not see the icons. He felt heavy at heart. He prayed and besought God that the misfortunes that threatened him, that were ready to burst upon him tomorrow, if not today, might somehow pass him by as storm clouds in time of drought pass over a village without yielding one drop of rain. And so many sins were heaped up in the past. So many sins, and getting away from them or wiping them out was so beyond hope that it seemed incongruous even to ask forgiveness. But he did ask forgiveness, and even gave a loud sob, but no one took any notice of that, since they supposed he had had a drop too much. There was a sound of fretful childish wail. "Take me away from here, Mamma darling." "Quiet there," cried the priest. When the young couple returned from the church, people ran after them. There were crowds, too, round the shop, round the gates, and in the yard under the windows. Peasant women came to sing songs in their honor. The young couple had scarcely crossed the threshold when the choristers, who were already standing in the outer room with their music books, break into a chant at the top of their voices. A band brought expressly from town struck up. Sparkling Don wine was brought in tall glasses, and Yelizarov, a carpenter, who was also a contractor, a tall, gaunt man, with eyebrows so bushy that his eyes could scarcely be seen, said, addressing the pair, "Anisim and you, my child, love one another. Lead a godly life, little children, and the Heavenly Mother will not abandon you." He fell upon the old father's shoulder and gave a sob. "Grigory Petrovich, let us weep with joy," he said in a thin voice, and then at once burst out laughing and continued in a loud bass. "Ho, ho, ho, this one, too, is a fine daughter-in-law for you. Everything is in its place in her. Everything runs smoothly, not creaking. The whole mechanism works well. Lots of screws in it." He was a native of the Yegori district, but had worked in the mills at Yuklyevo and in the neighborhood since his youth, and had made it his home. For years he had been a familiar figure, as old and gaunt and lanky as now, and for years he had had the nickname Crutch. Perhaps because he had done nothing but repair work for 40 years, and judged everybody and everything by its soundness, always asking himself if things were in need of repair. Before sitting down to a table, he tried several chairs to see whether they were solid, and he touched the smoked white fish, too. After the done wine, they all sat down to table. The visitors talked, moving their chairs. The choristers were singing in the outer room. The band was playing, and at the same time the peasant women in the yard were singing their songs in unison, and there was an awful, wild medley of sounds which made one giddy. Crutch fidgeted about on his chair and prodded his neighbors with his elbows, prevented people from talking, and laughed and cried alternatively. "Children, children, children," he muttered rapidly. "Aksinya, my dear, Varvara, darling, let us all live in peace and harmony, my dear little hatchets." He drank little, and was not drunk from only one glass of English bitters. The revolting bitters, made from nobody knows what, intoxicated everyone who drank it, stunning them as it were. Tongues began to falter. The local clergy were present, and the clerks from the mills with their wives, tradesmen and tavern keepers from the other villages. The clerk and the elder of the rural district, who had served together for 14 years, and who had during all the time never signed a single document for anybody, or let a single person out of the office without deceiving or insulting him, were sitting now side by side, both fat and replete, and it seemed as though they were so steeped in injustice and falsehood that even the skin of their faces had a peculiar, thievish look. The clerk's wife, a thin woman with a squint, brought all her children with her, and like a bird of prey looks aslant at the plates, snatched everything she could get a hold of, put it in her own and her children's pockets. Lipa sat as though turned to stone, still with the same expression as in church. Anisim had not said a single word to her since he had made her acquaintance, so that he did not even know the sound of her voice, and now, sitting beside her, he remained mute and went on drinking bitters. And when he got drunk, he began talking to Lipa's aunt, sitting opposite. "I have a friend called Samarodov, a peculiar man. He is by rank an honorary citizen, and he can talk. But I know him through and through, auntie, and he knows it. Pray join me in drinking to Samarodov's health, auntie." Varvara, worn out and distracted, walked around the table, pressing the guests to eat, and was evidently pleased that there were so many dishes, and that everything was so lavish. No one could disparage them now. The sun set, but the dinner went on. The guests were beyond knowing what they were eating or drinking. It was impossible to distinguish what was said, and only from time to time, when the band subsided, some peasant woman could be heard shouting outside, "You sucked the blood out of us, you plunderers, a plague on you." In the evening they danced to the band. The crewmen juniors came, bringing wine of their own, and one of them, when dancing a quadrille, held a bottle in his hand and a wine-glass in his mouth, and that made everyone laugh. In the middle of the quadrille they suddenly crooked their knees and danced in a squatting position. Aksinya in a green flew by like a flash, raising a wind with her train. Someone trod on her flounce, and Crutch shouted, "Hey, they have torn off the baseboard, children." Aksinya had naive grey eyes, which rarely blinked, and the naive smile played continually on her face. And in those unblinking eyes, and in that little head on the long neck, and in her slenderness, there was something snake-like. All in green, with her yellow bosom, and this smile on her lips, she looked like a viper that peers out of the young rye in the spring at the passers-by, stretching itself and lifting its head. The crewmen were free in their behavior to her, and it was very noticeable that she had long been on intimate terms with the eldest of them. But her deaf husband saw nothing. He did not look at her. He sat with his legs crossed and ate nuts, cracking them so loudly that it sounded like pistol shots. But behold, the old Tuzukin himself walked into the middle of the room and waved his handkerchief as a sign that he too wanted to dance the Russian dance. And all over the house and from the crowd in the yard rose a hum of approbation. It's himself. He stepped out himself. Varvara danced, but the old man only waved his handkerchief and kicked up his heels. But the people in the yard, propped against one another, peeping in at the windows, were in raptures, and for that moment forgave him everything, his wealth and the wrongs he had done them. "Well done, Grigory Petrovitch," was heard in the crowd. "Go it, you can still do it, huh?" It was kept up till late, till 2 o'clock in the morning. Anisim, staggering, went to take leave of the singers, and musicians, and gave each of them a new half-ruble. His father, who was not staggering but treading more heavily on one leg, saw his guests off, and said to each of them, "The wedding cost 2,000. As the party was breaking up, someone took the Chekhov innkeeper's good coat instead of his own old one, and Anisim suddenly flew into a rage and began shouting, "Stop! I'll find it at once. I know who stole it. Stop!" He ran out into the street in pursuit of someone, but he was caught, brought back home, shoved, drunken, and with anger and wet, into a room where the aunt was undressing Lipa and was locked in. 5 days had passed. Anisim, who was ready to leave, went upstairs to say goodbye to Varvara. All the lamps were burning before the icons. There was a smell of incense, while she sat at the window knitting a stocking of red wool. "You have not stayed with us long," she said. "You're bored, I suppose. We live comfortably, we have plenty of everything. We celebrated your wedding properly, in good style. Your father says it came to 2,000. In fact, we live like merchants. Only it's dreary here. We treat the people very badly. My heart aches, my dear, how we treat them, my goodness. Whether we barter a horse or buy something or hire a laborer, he's cheating in everything. Cheating and cheating. The hempseed oil in the shop is bitter, rancid, worse than pitch. But surely, tell me pray, couldn't we sell good oil?" "Every man to his trade, Mama." "But you know, we all have to die. Oh, really, you ought to think of that. You have to talk to your father." "Why, you should talk to him yourself." Well, I did put in a word, but he said just what you do. Every man to his own trade." "Do you suppose in the next world they'll consider what trade you have been put to? God's judgment is just." "Of course they won't consider," said Anisim, and he gave a heaved sigh. "There is no God anyway, you know, Mama. So what's considering can there be?" Varvara looked at him with surprise, burst out laughing, and struck her hands together, perhaps because she was so genuinely surprised at his words, and looked at him as though he were queer. He was embarrassed. "Perhaps there is a God, only there is no faith. When I was being married, I was not myself. Just as you may take an egg from under a hen and there is a chicken chirping in it, so my conscience suddenly piped up, and while I was being married I thought at the time, there is a God. But when I left the church, it was nothing. And indeed, how can I tell whether there is a God or not? We are not taught right from childhood, and while the babe is still in her mother's breast, he is only taught every man to his own trade. Father does not believe in God either. You were saying that Congreve had some sheep stolen? I found him. It was a peasant at Chekhov stole him. He stole them, but our fathers got the hides. So that's all his faith amounts to." Anisim winked and wagged his head. "The elder does not believe in God either," he went on, "nor the cleric, nor the high priest. And as for their going to church and keeping the fasts, that is simply to prevent people taking ill of him. And in case it really may be true that there will be a day of judgment. Nowadays people say that the end of the world has come because people have grown weak, do not honor their parents, and so on. All that is trifle. My idea, Mama, is that all our trouble is because there is so little conscience in people. I see through things, Mama, and I understand. If a man has stolen a shirt, I see it. A man sits in a tavern, and you fancy he is drinking tea and no more. But to me, the tea is neither here nor there. I see further. He has no conscience. You can go about the whole day and not meet one man with a conscience. And the whole reason is that they don't know whether there is a God or not. Well, goodbye, Mama. Keep alive and well. Don't remember evil against me." Anisim bowed down at Varvara's feet. "I thank you for everything, Mama," he said. "You are a great asset to our family. You are a very decent woman, and I am very pleased with you." Much moved, Anisim went out, but returned again and said, "Samarodov has got me mixed up in something. I shall either make my fortune or come to grief. If anything happens, then you must comfort my father, Mama." "Oh, nonsense, don't you worry. God is merciful. And Anisim, you should pet your wife a little. Instead, you give each other silky looks. You might smile at least." Yes, she is rather a queer one, said Anisim, and he gave a sigh. She does not understand anything. She never speaks. She is very young. Let her grow up. A tall, sleek white stallion was already standing at the front door, harnessed to the chaise. Old Subukin jumped in, sat down jauntily, and took the reins. Anisim kissed Varvara, Aksinya, and his brother. On the steps Lipa too was standing. She was standing motionless, looking away, and it seemed as though she had not come to see him off, but just by chance, for some unknown reason. Anisim went up to her and just touched her cheeks with his lips. "Goodbye," he said. And without looking at him, she gave a strange smile. Her face began to quiver, and everyone for some reason felt sorry for her. Anisim too leaped into the chaise with a bound and put his arms jauntily akimbo, for he considered himself a good-looking fellow. When they drove up out of the ravine, Anisim kept looking back towards the village. It was a warm, bright day. The cattle was being driven out for the first time, and the peasant girls and women were walking by the herd in their holiday dresses. The dun-colored bull bellowed, glad to be free, and pawed the ground with his forefeet. On all sides, above and below, the larks were singing. Anisim looked round at the elegant white church. It had only lately been whitewashed, and he thought how he had been praying in it 5 days before. He looked around at the school with the green roof, at the little river in which he used to bathe and catch fish, and there was a stir of joy in his heart, and he wished that a wall might rise up from the ground and prevent him from going farther, and then he might be left with nothing but the past. At the station, they went to the refreshments room and drank a glass of sherry each. His father felt in his pocket for his purse to pay. "I will stand treat," said Anisim. The old man, touched and delighted, slapped him on the shoulder and winked to the waiter as much as to say, "See what a fine son I got." You got to stay at home in the business, Anisim," he said. "You will be worth any price to me. I would shower you with gold from head to foot, my son." "It can't be done, Papa." The sherry was sour and smelled of sealing wax, but they had another glass. When old Subukin returned home from the station, at first he did not recognize his younger daughter-in-law. As soon as her husband had driven out of the yard, Lipa was transformed and suddenly brightened up. Wearing a shabby skirt with her feet bare and her sleeves tucked up to the shoulders, she was scrubbing the stairs in the entry and singing a silvery little voice. When she brought out a big tub of slops and looked up at the sun with her childlike smile, it seemed as though she too were a lark. An old laborer who was passing by the door shook his head and cleared his throat. "Yes, indeed, your daughters-in-law, Grigory Petrovitch, are a blessing from God," he said. "Not women, but treasures." On Friday, the 8th of July, Elizarov, nicknamed Crutch, and Lipa were returning from the village of Kazanskaya, where they had been to a service on the occasion of a local church holiday in honor of the Holy Mother of Kazan. A good distance behind them walked Lipa's mother, Praskovia, who always fell back. She was ill and short of breath. It was drawing towards evening. "Ah," said Crutch, wondering as he listened to Lipa. "Ah, well, I'm very fond of them, Ilya Makarich," said Lipa. "I sit down in my little corner and drink tea and eat jam, or I drink it with Varvara Nikolaevna, and she tells some story full of feeling. She has a lot of jam, 4 jars. 'Have some, Lipa,' she says. 'Eat as much as you like.' Ah, 4 jars. They live very well. We have white bread with our tea, and meat too, as much as one wants. They live very well. Only I'm frightened in their presence, Ilya Makarich. Oh, how frightened I am." "Why are you frightened, child?" asked Crutch, and he looked back to see how far behind Praskovia was. "At first, after the wedding, I was afraid of Anisim Grigorich. Anisim Grigorich did nothing. He didn't ill-treat me, only when he comes near me a cold shiver runs all over me, through all my bones. And I did not sleep one night. I trembled all over and kept praying to God. And now I am afraid of Aksinya, Ilya Makarich. It's not that she does anything. She's always laughing, but sometimes she glances at the window, and her eyes are so angry, and there is a greenish gleam in them, like the eyes of sheep in the pen. The Khrumin juniors are leading her astray. Your old man, they tell her, has a bit of land in Butokino, 100 acres, and they say There is sand and water there, so you, Aksinya, they say, build a brickyard there, so we will go shares on it. Bricks are now 20 rubles 1,000. It's a profitable business. Yesterday at dinner, Aksinya said to the old men, I want to build a brickyard at Butikino. I'm going into business on my own account. She laughed as she said it, and Grigory Petrovich's face darkened. One could see he did not like it. As long as I live, he said, the family must not break up. We must keep together. She gave a look and gritted her teeth. Further reserved, she would not eat them. Ah, Crutch was surprised. And tell me, if you please, when does she sleep? Said Lipa. She sleeps for half an hour, then jumps up and keeps walking and walking about to see whether the peasants have not set fire to something, have not stolen something. She frightens me, Ilya Makarich. And the Krumin juniors did not go to bed after the wedding, but drove to the town to go to law with each other. And folks do say it is all on the account of Aksinya. 2 of the brothers have promised to build her a brickyard, but the third is offended, and the factory has been at standstill for a month, and my uncle Prokhor is without work and goes about from house to house getting crusts. Hadn't you better go working on the land or sawing up wood meanwhile, uncle? I tell him. Why disgrace yourself? I've got out of the way of it, he says. I don't know how to do any sort of peasant work now, Lipinka. They stopped to rest and wait for Praskovia near a copse of young aspen trees. Elizarov had long been a contractor in a small way, but he kept no horse, going on foot all over the district with nothing but a little bag in which which there was bread and onions, and stalking along with big strides, swinging his arms. It was difficult to walk with him. At the entrance to the copse stood a milestone. Elizarov touched it to see if it was firm. Praskovia reached them out of breath. Her wrinkled and always scared-looking face was beaming with happiness, and she had been at church today like anyone else. Then she had been to the fair, and there had drunk pear cider. For her this was unusual, and it even seemed to her now that she had lived for her own pleasure that day for the first time in her life. After resting, they all three walked on side by side. The sun had already set, and its beams filtered through the copse, gleaming on the trunks of the trees. There was a faint sound of voices ahead, and the Okleva girls had gone on long before, but had lingered in the copse, probably gathering mushrooms. "Hey, wenches!" cried Elizarov. "Hey, my beauties!" There was sound of laughter in response. "Crutch is coming, Crutch, the old horseradish." And the echo laughed too. And the copse was left behind. The tops of the factory chimneys came into view. The cross on the belfry glittered. This was the village, the one where the high priest ate all the caviar at the funeral. Now they were almost home. They only had to go down into the big ravine. Lipa and Praskovia, who had been walking barefoot, sat down on the grass to put on their shoes. Elizarov sat down with them. If they looked down from above, Okleva looked beautiful and peaceful, with its willow trees, its white church, and its little river, and the only blot on the picture was the roof of the factories, painted for the sake of cheapness, a dark sullen color. On the slope on the farther side they could see the rye, some in stacks and sheaves, here and there as though strewn about by the storm, and some freshly cut lying in swaths. The oats, too, were ripe, and glistened now in the sun like mother of pearl. It was harvest time. Today was a holiday. Tomorrow they would harvest the rye and cart the hay, and then Sunday a holiday again. Every day there was muttering of distant thunder. It was muggy and looked like rain, and gazing now at the fields everyone thought, God grant us we get the harvest in time. And everyone felt at once happy and joyful and anxious at heart. Mowers ask a high price nowadays, said Praskovia. 1 ruble and 40 kopecks a day. People kept coming from the fair at Kazanskaya, peasant women, mill hands in new caps, beggars, children. A cart would drive by stirring up the dust, and behind it would run an unsold horse, and it seemed glad it had not been sold. Then a cow was led along by the horns, resisting stubbornly. Then a cart again, and its drunken peasants swinging their legs. An old woman led a little boy in a big cap and big boots. The boy was tired out with the heat and the heavy boots which prevented him from bending his legs at the knees. but yet he blew a tin trumpet incessantly with all his might. They had gone down the slope and turned into the street, but the trumpet could still be heard. "Our mill owners don't seem quite themselves," said Yelizarov. "It's bad. Kostikov got angry with me. Too many batons have been used for the cornices." "Too many?" "As many have been used as were needed, Vasily Danielitch. I don't eat them with my porridge." "How can you speak to me like that?" said he. "You good for nothing, you blockhead. Don't forget yourself. It was I who made you contractor." "That's nothing so wonderful," said I. "Even before I got to be contractor, I used to have tea every day." "You're all crooks," he said. I held my peace. "We are crooks in this world," thought I, "and you will be crooks in the next." The next day he was softer. "Don't you hear malice against me for my words, Makarich," he said. "If I said too much," says he, "what of it? I'm a merchant of the first guild. You're better. You ought to hold your tongue." "You," said I, "are a merchant of the first guild, and I'm a carpenter. That is correct. And Saint Joseph was a carpenter too. Ours is the righteous and godly calling. And if you are pleased to be my better, you are very welcome to it, Vasily Danielitch." And later on, after the conversation, I thought, which was the better man, a merchant of the first guild or a carpenter? The carpenter must be, children. Crutch thought a minute and added, "Yes, that's how it is, children. He who works, he who is patient is the better man." By now the sun had set, and thick mist as white as milk was rising over the river, in the church enclosure, and in the open spaces around the mills. By now the sun has set, and the thick white mist as white as milk was riding over the river, in the church enclosure, and in the open spaces around the mills. Now when the darkness was coming on rapidly, when lights were twinkling below, and when it seemed as though the mists were hiding a fathomless abyss, Lipa and her mother, who was born in poverty and prepared to live so till the end, giving up to others everything except their frightened gentle souls, may perhaps have fancied, for a minute, that in this vast mysterious world, among the endless series of life, they too counted for something. And they too were better than someone. They liked sitting up here. They smiled happily and forgot that they must go down below again all the time. At last they reached home. The mowers was sitting on the ground at the gates near the shop. As a rule, the Congreve peasants refused to work for Tsubukin, and he had to hire strangers. And now in the darkness it seemed as though there were men with long black beards sitting there. The shop was open, and through the doorway they could see the deaf man playing checkers with a boy. The mowers were singing softly, almost inaudibly, or were loudly demanding their wages for the previous day. They were not paid, for fear they should go away before tomorrow. Old Tsubukin, with his coat off, was sitting in his waistcoat with Aksenia under a birch tree, drinking tea. A lighted lamp was on the table. "I say, grandfather," a mower called from the outside the gates, as though taunting him, "pay us halfway. Hey, grandfather." And at once there was a sound of laughter, and then again they sang almost inaudibly. Crutch too sat down to have some tea. "We've been at the fair, you know," he began telling them. "We had a fine time, a very fine time, my children, praise the Lord. But an unfortunate thing happened. Sashka, the blacksmith, bought some tobacco and gave the shopman half a ruble, you know. And the half ruble was a false one," Quetch went on. "And he meant to speak in a whisper, but he spoke in a smothered, husky voice, which was audible to everyone. The half ruble turned out to be a bad one. He was asked where he got it. Anisim Tsubukin gave it to me, he said. When I was at the wedding, he said. They called the police, took the man away. Look out, Grigory Petrovitch. That's nothing comes of it. No talk." "Grandfather," the same voice called tauntingly outside the gates. "Grandfather." A silence followed. "Ah, little children, little children, little children," Crutch muttered rapidly. And he got up. He was overcome with drowsiness. "Well, thank you for the tea, for the sugar, little children. It's time to sleep. I'm broken down, my beams have rotten away." As he walked away, he said, "I suppose it's time I was dead." and he gave a sob. Old Sabukin did not finish his tea, but sat on a little, pondering. And his face looked as though he were listening to the footsteps of Crutch, who was far down the street. Sashka the blacksmith told a lie, I expect, told Aksinya, guessing his thoughts. He went into the house and came back a little later with a parcel. He opened it, and there was the gleam of the rubles, perfectly new coins. He took one, tried it with his teeth, flung it on the tray, then flung down another. The rubles really are false, he said, looking at Aksinya and seemed perplexed. These are those Anisim brought, his present. Take them, daughter, he whispered, and thrust the parcel in her hands. Take them and throw them into the well. Confound them. And mind that there is no talk about it. Harm might come of it. Take away the samovar, put out the light. Lipa and her mother, sitting in the barn, saw the lights go out one after another. Only up in Varvara's room there was a blue and red icon lamps gleaming, and a feeling of peace, contentment, and happy ignorance seemed to flow down from there. Praskovia could never get used to her daughter's being married to a rich man, and when she came to the house she huddled timidly in the entry with a beseeching smile on her face, and tea and sugar was sent out to her. And Lipa could not get used to it either, and after her husband had gone away she did not sleep in her bed, but lay down anywhere to sleep, in the kitchen or the shed, and every day she scrubbed the floor or washed the clothes, and felt as though she was hired by the day. And now, on coming back from the services at Kazanskaya, they had tea in the kitchen with the cook, and they went into the shed and lay down on the ground between the sledge and the wall. It was dark here and smelled of harness. The lights went out about the house, then they could hear the deaf man shutting up the shop, the mowers settling themselves about the yard to sleep. In the distance, the Hruman juniors, they were playing the expensive accordion. Praskovia and Lipa began to doze off. When they were awakened by someone's steps, the moon was shining brightly. At the entrance to the shed stood Aksinya, with her bedding in her arms. "Maybe it's a bit cooler here," she said. Then she came in and lay down almost in the doorway, so that the moonlight fell upon her. She did not sleep, but breathed heavily, tossing from side to side with the heat, throwing off almost all the bedclothes. And in the magic moonlight, what a proud animal she was. A little time passed, and then steps were heard again. The old father, white all over, appeared in the doorway. "Aksinya," he called, "are you there?" "Well," she responded angrily, "I told you just now to throw the money into the well. Did you do it?" "What next? Throwing property into the water? I gave it to the mowers." "Oh my God," cried the old man, dumbfounded and alarmed. "Oh my God, you wicked woman." He stood his hands together and went out, and kept talking to himself as he went away. And a little later Aksinya sat up and sighed heavily with annoyance, then rose up, gathering up her bedclothes in her arms, went out. "Why did you marry me into this family, mother?" said Lipa. "One has to be married, daughter. It was not us that ordered things so." And a feeling of inconsolable woe was ready to take possession of him. But it seemed to them that someone was looking down from the height of the heavens, out of the blue where the stars were, that someone saw everything that was going on in Nucleeva and was watching over them. And however powerful evil was, yet the night was calm and beautiful. And yet in God's world there is and will be righteousness as calm and beautiful, and everything on earth is only waiting to be made one with righteousness, even as the moonlight is blended with the night. And both, huddling close to one another, fell asleep comforted. News had come long before that Anisim had been put in prison for counterfeiting money and circulating it. Months went by, more than half a year went by, the long winter was over, spring had begun, and everyone in the house and in the village had grown used to the fact that Anisim was in prison. And when anyone passed by the house or the shop at night, he would remember that Anisim was in prison. And when they rang at the churchyard for some reason, that too reminded people that he was in prison awaiting trial. It seemed as though a shadow had fallen upon the house. It looked more somber, The roof had become rusty, the green paint on the heavy iron-bound door into the shop had faded, and old Subukin himself seemed to have grown darker. He had given up cutting his hair and beard and looked shaggy. He no longer sprang jauntily into his chase, nor shouted to beggars, "God will provide." His strength was on the wane, and that was evident in everything. People were less afraid of him now, and the police officer drew up the formal charge against him in the shop, though he received his regular bribe as before. And 3 times the old man was called up to the town to be tried for the illicit sale of spirits, and the case was continuously adjourned owing to the non-appearance of witnesses. And old Subukin was worn out with worry. He often went to see his son, hired lawyers, handed in petitions, presented a banner in some church. He presented the warden of the prison in which Anisim was confined with a long spoon and a silver holder for a tea glass with the inscription, "The soul knows its right measure." "There is no one to look after things for us," said Varvara. "You ought to ask someone of the gentry to write to the head officials. At least they might let him get out on bail. Why wear the poor fellow out?" She too was grieved, but she nevertheless grew stouter and whiter. She lighted the lamps before the icons as before, and saw that everything in the house was clean, and regaled the guests with jam and apple tarts. The deaf man and Aksinya looked after the shop. A new project was in progress, a beer cart at Butikino, and Aksinya went there almost every day in the chase. She drove herself, and when she made acquaintances, she stretched out her neck like a snake in the young rye, and smiled naively and enigmatically. Lipa spent her time playing with the baby which had been born to her just before Lent. It was a tiny, thin, pitiful little baby, and it was strange that it should cry and gaze about and be considered a human being, even be called Nikifor. He lay in a cradle, and Lipa would walk away towards the door and say, bowing to him, "How do you do, Nikifor Anisimich?" And she would rush to him and kiss him. Then she would walk away to the door, bow again and say, "How do you do, Nikifor Anisimich?" And he'd kick up his little red legs, and his crying was mixed with laughter, like the carpenter Yelizarov's. At last the day of the trial was fixed. Subukin went away some 5 days before. Then the Subukins heard that the peasants called as a witness had been fetched. Their old workman, who was one of those to receive notice to appear, went too. The trial was on Thursday, but Sunday had passed, and Subukin was still not back, and there was no news. Towards the evening on Tuesday, Varvara was sitting at the open window waiting for her husband to come. In the next room Lipa was playing with her baby. She was tossing him up in her arms and saying ecstatically, "You will grow ever so big, ever so big. You will be a peasant. We shall go out to work by the day together. We shall go out to work by the day together." "Come, come," said Varvara, offended. "Go out to work by the day? What an idea, you silly thing. He will be a merchant." Lipa sang softly, but a minute later she forgot and began again. "You will grow ever so big, ever so big. You will be a peasant. We will go out to work by the day together." There she is at it again. Lipa and Nikifor in her arms stood still in the doorway and asked, "Why do I love him so much, Maminka? Why do I feel so sorry for him?" She went on with a quivering voice, and her eyes glistened with tears. "Who is he? What is he like? As light as a little feather, as a little crumb, but I love him as if he was a real person. Here he can do nothing, he can't talk, and yet I know from his little eyes what he wants." Varvara pricked up her ears. The sound of the evening train coming into the station reached her. Had her husband come? She did not hear, and she did not heed what Lipa was saying. She had no idea how the time passed, but only trembled all over, not with dread, but with intense curiosity. She saw a cart full of peasants roll quickly by with a rattle. It was the witnesses coming back from the station. When the cart passed the shop, the old workman jumped out and walked into the yard. She could hear him being greeted in the yard and being asked some questions. "Loss of rights and all property," he said loudly, "and 6 years penal servitude in Siberia." She could see Aksinya come out of the shop by the back way. She had just been selling kerosene, and in one hand held a bottle and in the other a can, and she had some silver coins in her mouth. "Where is father?" she asked, lisping. "At the station," answered the laborer. "When it gets a little darker," he said, "then I'll come." And when it became known all through the household that Anisim was sentenced to penal servitude, the cook in the kitchen suddenly broke into a wail as though at a funeral, imagining that this was demanded by the proprieties. "Who will care for us now you have gone, Anisim Grigorich, our bright falcon?" The dogs began barking in alarm. Varvara ran to the window and, rushing about in distress, shouted to the cook with all her might, straining her voice, "Stop, Stepanida, stop! Don't harrow us, for Christ's sake!" They forgot to set the samovar. They could think of nothing. Only Lipa could not make out what it was all about, and went on playing with the baby. When the old father arrived from the station, they asked him no question. He greeted them and walked through all the rooms in silence. He had no supper. "There was no one to see about things," Varvara began when they were alone. "I said you should have asked some of the gentry. You would not listen to me at the time. A petition would—" "I saw to things," said her husband with a wave of his hand. "When Anisim was condemned, I went to the gentleman who was defending him. 'It's no use now,' he said. 'It's too late.' And Anisim said the same. 'It's too late.' But all the time I came out of court, I engaged a lawyer and gave him an advance. I'll wait a week and then I'll go again. It is as God wills." Again the old man walked through all the rooms, and when he went back to Varvara he said, "I must be ill. My head's in sort of fog. My thoughts are mixed up." He closed the door that Lipa might not hear, and went on softly, "I'm worried about my money. Do you remember before his wedding Anisim bringing me some new rubles and half-rubles? One parcel I put away at the time, but the others I mixed with my own money. When my uncle Dmitri Filadych, the kingdom of heaven be his, was alive, he used to go to Moscow and to Crimea to buy goods. He had a wife, and this same wife, when he was away buying goods, used to take up with other men. They had half a dozen children, and when uncle was in his cups, he would laugh and say, 'I never can make out,' he used to say, 'which are my children and which are other people's.' An easy-going disposition, to be sure. And so now I can't tell which are genuine rubles and which are false ones, and they all seem false to me. Nonsense, God bless you. I buy a ticket at the station, I give the man 3 rubles, and I keep fancying they're counterfeit, and I'm frightened. I must be ill. There's no denying it. We're all at God's hands." "Oh, dear, dear," said Varvara, and she shook her head. "You had to think about this, Grigory Petrovitch. You never know. Anything may happen. You're not a young man. See they don't wrong your grandchild when you're dead and gone. Oh, I'm afraid they will be unfair to Nikifor. He is as good as fatherless, and his mother young and foolish. You had to settle something on the poor little boy. At least the land. Butikino, Grigory Pavlovich, really, think it over." Varvara went on persuading him. "He's such a pretty boy. It's a pity. You go tomorrow and make out a deed. Why put it off?" "I'd forgotten my grandson," said Tsibukin. "I must go and have a look at him." "So you say the boy is all right? Well, let him grow up, please God." He opened the door and, crooking his finger, beckoned to Lipa. She went up to him with the baby in her arms. "If there's anything you want, Lipinka, you ask for it," he said, "and eat anything you like. We don't grudge it, so long as it doesn't do you no good." He made the sign of a cross over the baby. "And take care of my grandson. My son is gone, but my grandson is left." Tears rolled down his cheeks. He gave a sob and went away. Soon afterwards he went to bed and slept soundly after 7 sleepless nights. Old Subukin went to the town for a short visit. Someone told Aksinya that he had gone to the notary to make his will, that he was leaving Butukino, the very place where she had set up a brickyard to Nikifor, his grandson. She was informed of this in the morning when old Subukin and Varvara were sitting near the steps under the birch tree having their tea. She closed the shop in the front and the back, gathered together all the keys she had, and flung them at her father-in-law's feet. "I'm not going on working for you," she began in a loud voice, and suddenly broke into sobs. "It seems I am not your daughter-in-law, but a servant. Everybody's jeering and saying, See what a servant the Tsubucans have got a hold of. I did not hire myself out to you. I am not a beggar. I am not a homeless wench. I have a father and a mother. She did not wipe away her tears. She fixed upon her father-in-law's eyes full of tears, vindictive, squinting with anger. Her face and neck were red and tense, and she was shouting at the top of her voice. I don't mean to go on slaving for you, she continued. I am worn out. When it is work, when it is sitting in the shop day in, day out, sneaking out at night for vodka, then it is my share. When it is giving away the land, then it is for that convict's wife and her imp. She is mistress here, and I am her servant. Give her everything, the convict's wife, and may it choke her. I'm going home. Find yourself some other fool, you damn bloodsuckers. The old man never in his life scolded or punished his children, and had never dreamed that one of his family could speak to him rudely or behave disrespectfully. And now he was very much frightened. He ran into the house and hid behind a cupboard. And Varvara was so much flustered that she could not get up from her seat, and only waved her hands before her as though she was waiting off a bee. "Oh, holy saints, what's the meaning of it?" she muttered in horror. "What is she shouting? Oh, dear, dear, people will hear. Hush, hush." "You have given Butekina to the convict's wife," Aksenia went on bawling. "Give her everything now. I don't want anything from you. Go to hell. You're all gang of thieves here. I've seen enough. I've had my fill of it. I've robbed people coming and going. You have robbed old and young alike, you brigands. And who has been selling vodka without a license? And false money. You've stuffed your coffers full of false coins. And now I'm no more use." By now a crowd had collected at the open gate and was staring into the yard. "Let the people look," bawled Aksenia. "I'll put you all to shame. You shall burn up with shame. You'll grovel at my feet. Hey, Stepan," she called to her deaf man. "Let us go home this minute. Let us go to my father and mother. I don't want to live with convicts. Get ready." Clothes were hanging on the line stretched across the yard. She snatched off her petticoats and blouses, still wet, and flung them into the deaf man's arms. Then in her fury she dashed about the yards where the linen hung, tore down all of it, and what was not hers she threw it on the ground and trampled upon it. "Holy saints, stop her," moaned Varvara. "What a woman! Give her Butikina, give it to her, for Christ's sake." "Well, what a woman," people were saying at the gate. "She's a woman. She's going it. It's something like." Aksenia ran into the kitchen where laundering was being done. Lipa was washing alone. The cook had gone to the river to rinse the clothes. Steam was rising from the trough and from the cauldron near the stove, and the air in the kitchen was close and thick with vapor. On the floor was a heap of unwashed clothes, and Nikifor, kicking up his little red legs, lay on the bench near them, so that if he fell he should not hurt himself. Just as Aksenia went in, Lipa took the former's chemise out of the heap and put it into the trough, and was just stretching out her hand to a big pitcher of boiling water which was standing on the table. "Give it here," said Aksenia, looking at her with hatred, and snatching up the chemise out of the trough. "It is not your business to touch my linen. You are a convict's wife, and ought to know your place and who you are." Lisa gazed at her, taken aback, and did not understand. But suddenly she caught the look Aksenia turned upon the child, and at once she understood, and went numb all over. "You've taken my land, so here you are." Saying this, Aksenia snatched up the pitcher with the boiling water and flung it over Nikifor. After this there was heard a scream such as never been heard before in Ukleva, and no one would have believed that a little weak creature like Lipa could scream like that. And it was suddenly quiet in the yard. Aksenia walked into the house in silence, with the old naive smile on her lips. The deaf man kept moving about the yard with his arms full of linen. Then he began hanging it up again, silently, without haste. And until the cook came back from the river, no one ventured to go into the kitchen to see what had happened there. Nikifor was taken to the district hospital, and towards evening he died there. Lipa did not wait to be fetched, but wrapped the dead baby in a little quilt and carried it home. The hospital, a new one recently built, with big windows, stood high up on a hill. It was glittering in the setting sun, and looked as though it was on fire from inside. There was a little village below, Lipa went down the road, and before reaching the village, sat down by a pond. A woman brought a horse to the water, but the horse would not drink. "What more do you want?" the woman said to it softly in perplexity. "What more do you want?" A boy in a red shirt, sitting at the water's edge, was washing his father's boots, and not another soul was in sight, either in the village or on the hill. "It's not drinking," said Lipa, looking at the horse. Then the woman with the horse and the boy with the boots walked away, and there was no one left at all. The sun went to sleep, covering itself with cloth of gold and purple, and long clouds, red and lilac, stretched across the sky, guarded its rest. Somewhere far away a bittern cried, a hollow, melancholy sound, as of a cow shut up in a barn. The cry of that mysterious bird was heard every spring, but no one knew what it was like or what it lived. At the top of the hill by the hospital, in the bushes, close to the pond and in the fields, the nightingales were trilling. The cuckoo kept reckoning someone's years, and losing count and beginning again. In the pond the frogs called angrily to one another, straining themselves to bristling, and one could even make out the words, "That's what you are, that's what you are." What a noise there was! It seemed as though all the creatures were singing and shouting, so that no one might sleep on that spring night, so that all, even the angry frogs, might appreciate and enjoy every minute. Life is given only once. A silver half-moon was shining in the sky. There were many stars. Lipa had no idea how long she sat by the pond, and when she got up and walked on, everybody was asleep in the little village, and there was a single light. It was probably about an 8 miles walk home, but neither body nor mind seemed equal to it. The moon gleamed now in front, now on the right, and the same cuckoo kept calling in a voice ground husky, with a chuckle as though gibbling at her. "Hey, look out, you'll lose your way." Lipa walked rapidly. She lost her handkerchief. She looked at the sky and wondered where her baby's soul was now. Was it following her, or floating aloft yonder among the stars and not thinking of her, the mother, any more? Or how lonely it is in the open country at night, in the midst of the singing when you yourself cannot sing, in the midst of the incessant cries of joy when you yourself cannot be joyful, when the moon, which cares not whether it is spring or winter, whether men are alive or dead, looks down lonely too. When there is grief in the heart, it is hard to be without people. If only her mother, Praskovia, had been with her, or Crutch, or the cook, or some peasant. "Boo!" cried the bittern, "boo!" And suddenly the sound of human speech became clearly audible. "Hitch up the horses, Vavila." Ahead of her, by the wayside, a campfire was burning. The flames had died down. There were only red embers. She could hear the horses munching. In the darkness she could see the outlines of 2 carts, one with a barrel, the other a lower one with sacks in it, and the figures of 2 men. One was leading a horse to put it into the shafts, the other was standing motionless by the fire with his hands behind his back. A dog growled near the carts. The one who was leading the horse stopped and said, "Someone seems to be coming along the road." "Sharik, be quiet," the other man called to the dog, and from the voice one could tell that he was an old man. Lipa stopped and said, "God aid you." The old man went up to her and said after a pause, "Good evening. Your dog does not bite, grandfather?" "No, come along, he won't touch you." "I've been at the hospital," said Lipa after a pause. "My little son died there. Here I am carrying him home." It must have been unpleasant for the old man to hear this, for he moved away and said hurriedly, "No matter, my dear, it's God's will. Your darling lad," he added, addressing his companion, "look alive." Your yoke isn't there," said the young man. "I don't see it." "That's just like Vavila." The old man picked up an ember, blew on it. Only his eyes and nose were lighted up. And then when they had found the yoke, he went up over to Lipa with the light and looked at her. And his look expressed compassion and tenderness. "You are a mother," he said. "Every mother grieves for her child." And he sighed and shook his head as he said it. Avila threw something on the fire, stamped it out, and at once it was very dark. The immediate scene vanished, and as before there were only the fields, the sky with the stars, and the noise of the birds keeping each other from sleep. And the landrill called, it seemed, in every place where the fire had been. But a minute passed, and the two carts and the old man and lanky Avila became visible again. The carts creaked as they rolled out on the road. "Are you holy men?" Lipa asked the old man. "No, we are from Firsanova." "You looked at me just now, and my heart was softened. And the lad is so gentle. I thought you must be holy men." "Have you far to go?" "To Yukleva. Get in. We will give you a lift as far as Kuzmenki. Then you go straight on, and we turn off to the left." Avila got into the cart with the barrel and the old man, and Lipa got into the other. They moved at a walking pace, Avila in front. "My baby was in torment all day," said Lipa. "He looked at me with his little eyes and said nothing. He wanted to speak and could not. Lord God, Queen of Heaven, in my grief I kept falling down on the floor. I would be standing there, and then I would fall down by the bedside. And tell me, grandfather, why should a little one be tormented before his death? When a grown-up person, a man or woman, is in torment, his sins are forgiven. But why a little one, when he has no sins? Why?" "Who can tell?" answered the old man. They drove on for half an hour in silence. "We can't know everything, how and why," said the old man. "A bird is given not 4 wings, but 2, because it is able to fly with 2. And so man is not permitted to know everything, but only half or a quarter. As much as he needs to know in order to live, so much he knows." "It is better for me to go on foot, grandfather. Now my heart is all of a tremble." "Never mind, sit still." The old man yawned and made the sign of a cross over his mouth. "Never mind," he repeated. "Yours is not the worst of sorrows. Life is long. There is good and bad yet to come. There is everything yet to come. Great is Mother Russia," he said, and looked around either side of him. "I've been all over Russia, and I have seen everything in her. And you may believe my words, my dear, there will be good and there will be bad. I went as delegate from my village to Siberia, and I've been to the Amur River and the Altai Mountains, and I've lived in Siberia. I worked the land there. Then I got homesick for Mother Russia, and I came back to my native village. We went back to Russia on foot, and I remember we went on a ferry, and I was thin as thin, all in rags, barefoot, freezing with cold, gnawing a crust. And a gentleman who was on a ferry, the kingdom of heaven be his if he's dead, looked at me pitifully, and tears came into his eyes. I said, 'Your bread is black, your days are black.' And when I got home, as this saying is, there was neither stick nor stone. I had a wife, but I left her behind in Siberia. She was buried there. So I'm a hired man now, and I tell you, since then I have had it good as well as bad. Here I do not want to die, my dear. I would be glad to live another 20 years. There has been more of the good. And great is our Mother Russia." And again he gazed on either side and looked around. "Grandfather," Lipa asked, "when anyone dies, how many days does his soul walk the earth?" "Who can tell? Ask Vavila here. He has been to school." "Now they teach them everything, Vavila," the old man called to him. "Yes, Vavila, when anyone dies, how long does his soul walk the earth?" Vavila stopped the horse and only then answered, 9 days. After my uncle Kirilla died, his soul lived in our cottage 13 days. How do you know? For 13 days there was a knocking in the stove. Well, all right, go on, said the old man, and it could be seen that he did not believe a word of that. Near Kuzmenki the cart turned into the high road while Lipa walked straight on. By now it was getting light. As she went down into the ravine, the Yukleva houses and the church were hidden in fog. It was cold, and it seemed to her that the same cuckoo was calling still. When Lipa reached her home, the cattle had not yet been driven out. Everyone was asleep. She sat down on the steps and waited. The old man was the first to come out. He understood what had happened from the first glance at her, and for a long time he could not utter a word, but only smacked his lips. "Oh, Lipa," he said, "you did not take care of my grandchild." Aurora was awakened. She struck her hands together and broke into sobs, and immediately began laying out the baby. "And he was a pretty child," she said. "Oh dear, dear. You had the one child, and you did not take enough care of him, you silly thing." There was a requiem service in the morning and again in the evening. The funeral took place the next day, and after it the guests and the priests ate a great deal, and with such greed that one might have thought they had not tasted food for a long time. Lipa waited at a table, and the priest, lifting his fork on which there was a salted mushroom, said to her, "Don't grieve for the babe, for of such is the kingdom of heaven." Only when they had all left, Lipa realized fully that there was no Nikifor, and never would be. She realized it and broke into sobs. And she did not know what room to go into sob, for she felt that now that her child was dead, there was no place for her in the house, that she had no reason to be here, that she was in a way, and others felt it too. "Now what are you bellowing for?" Aksinya shouted, suddenly appearing in the doorway. Because of the funeral, she was dressed up in all new clothes and had powdered her face. "Shut up!" Lipa tried to stop but could not, and sobbed louder than ever. "Do you hear?" shouted Aksinya, and stamped her foot in violent anger. "Who is it I am speaking to? Get out of the house and don't set foot here again, you convict's wife. Get out." There, the old man put in fussily. "Aksinya, don't make such an outcry, my dear. She's crying. It's only natural. Her child is dead." "It's only natural," Aksinya mimicked him. "Let her stay the night here, and don't let me see a trace of her here tomorrow. It's only natural." She mimicked him again, and laughing went into the shop. Early the next morning, Lipa went off to her mother at Turgueva. The roof and the front door of the shop have now been repainted, and are as bright now as though they were new. There are happy geraniums in the windows as of old, and what happened to Jabukin's house in the yard 3 years ago is almost forgotten. Grigory Petrovich is still looked upon as the master, but in reality everything has passed into Aksinya's hands. She buys and sells, and nothing can be done without her consent. The brickyard is working well, and as bricks are wanted for the railway, the price has gone up to 24 rubles a thousand. Peasant women and girls cart the bricks to the station and load them up in the cars and earn a quarter ruble a day for the work. Aksinya has gone into partnership with the Hruman Juniors, and their mill is now called Hruman Juniors and Company. They have opened a tavern near the station, and now the expensive accordion is played not at the mill, but at the tavern. And the postmaster, who is engaged in some sort of business too, often goes there, and so does the station master. Hruman Juniors have presented the deaf man with a gold watch, and he is constantly taking it out of his pockets and putting it to his ear. People say of Aksinya that she has become a person of power, and it is true that when she drives in her brickyard in the morning, handsome and happy, with a naive smile on her face, and afterwards, when she gives orders there, one is aware of her great power. Everyone is afraid of her in the house and in the village and in the brickyard. When she goes to the postmaster jumps up and says to her, "I humbly beg you to be seated, Aksinya Abramovna." A certain landowner, middle-aged but foppish, in a tunic of fine cloth and high patent leather boots, sold her house, and was so carried away by talking to her that he knocked down the price to meet her wishes. He held her hand a long time, and looking into her merry, sly, naive eyes, said, "For a woman like you, Aksinya Abramovna, I should be ready to do anything you please. Only say when we can meet where no one will interfere with us." "Why, whenever you like." And since then the elderly fop has been driving up to the shop almost every day to drink beer, and the beer is horrid, bitter as wormwood. The landowner wags his head, but drinks it. Old Sabukin does not have anything at all to do with the business now. He does not keep any money because he cannot tell good from counterfeit coins. But he is silent. He says nothing of his weakness. He has become forgetful, and if they don't give him food, he does not ask for it. They have grown used to having dinner without him, and Varvara often says, "He went to bed again yesterday without eating anything." And she says it unconcernedly because she is used to it. For some reason, summer and winter alike, he wears a fur coat, and only in very hot weather he does not go out but sits at home. As a rule, he puts on his fur coat, wraps it around him, turns up his collar, and walks about the village, along the road to the station, or sits from morning till night on the seat near the church gates. He sits there without stirring. Passers-by bow to him, but he does not respond. For as of old, he dislikes the peasants. If he is asked a question, he answers quite rationally and politely, but briefly. There is a rumor going about the village that his daughter-in-law has turned him out of the house and gives him nothing to eat, and he is fed by charitable folk. Some are glad, others are sorry for him. Varvara has grown even fatter and her skin whiter, and as before she is active in good works, and Aksenia does not interfere with her. There is so much jam now that they have no time to eat it before the fresh fruit comes in. It goes sugary, and Varvara almost sheds tears, not knowing what to do with it. They have begun to forget about Anisim. Some time ago there came a letter from him written in verse on a big sheet of paper as though it were a petition, all in the same splendid handwriting. Evidently his friend Samarodov was doing time with him. Under the verses, in an ugly, scarcely legible handwriting, there was a single line. "I am ill here all the time. I am wretched. For Christ's sake, help me." One fine autumn day, toward evening, old Subukin was sitting near the church gates, with the collar of his fur coat turned up, and nothing of him could be seen but his nose and the peak of his cap. At the other end of the bench sat Yelizarov, the contractor, and besides him Yakov, the school watchman, a toothless old man of 70. Crutch and the watchman were talking. "Children ought to give food and drink to the old. Honor thy father and mother," Yakov was saying with irritation. "Well, this woman, has turned her father-in-law out of his own house. The old man has neither food nor drink. Where is he to go? He has not had a morsel these 3 days." "3 days?" said Crutch, amazed. "Here he sits and does not say a word. He has grown feeble. And why be silent? He ought to prosecute her. They wouldn't pat her on the back in court." Wouldn't pat whom on the back?" asked Crutch, not hearing. "What? The woman's all right. She does her best. In their line of business they can't get on without it. Without sin, I mean." From his own house, Yakov went on with irritation. "Save up and buy your own house, then turn people out of it. She's a nice one, to be sure, a plague." Subukin listened and did not stir. "Whether it is your own house or others, it makes no difference so long as it's warm and the women don't scold," said Crutch, and laughed. "When I was young, I was very fond of my Nastasia. She was a quiet woman, and she used to be always at it. 'Buy a house, Makarch, buy a house, Makarch, buy a horse, Makarch.' She was dying, and yet she kept on saying, 'Buy yourself a racing droshky, Makarch, so that you don't have to walk.' And I bought her nothing but gingerbread." "Her husband's deaf and stupid," Yakov went on, not listening to Crutch. "A regular fool, like a goose. He can't understand anything. Hit a goose in the head with a stick, and even then it does not understand." Crutch got up to go home. Yakov also got up, and both of them went off together, still talking. When they had gone 50 paces, old Subukin got up too, and walked after them, stepping uncertainly, as though on slippery ice. The village was already plunged in the dusk of evening, and the sun only gleamed on the upper part of the road, which ran wrigglingly like a snake up the slope. Old women were coming back from the woods, and children with them. They were bringing baskets of mushrooms. Peasant women and girls came in a crowd from the station, where they had been loading the cars with bricks, and their noses and the skin under their eyes were covered with red brick dust. They were singing. Ahead of them all was Lipa. With her eyes turned toward the sky, she was singing in a high voice,
breaking into trills as though exulting in the fact that the last day was over and the time for rest had come. In the crowd, walking with a bundle in her arms, breathless as usual, was her mother, Praskovia, who still went out to work by the day. "Good evening, Makarich," cried Lipa, seeing Crutch. "Good evening, dear." "Good evening, Lipenka," cried Crutch, delighted. "Girls, women, love the rich carpenter. Ho, ho, my little children, my little children." Crutch gave a sob. "My dear little hatchets." Crutch and Yakov went on further and could still be heard talking. Then after them came old Subokin, and there was a sudden hush in the crowd. Lipa and Praskovia had dropped a little behind, and when the old man was abreast of them, Lipa bowed down and said, "Good evening, Grigory Petrovitch." Her mother, too, bowed. The old man stopped and, saying nothing, looked at the two. His lips were quivering and his eyes full of tears. Lipa took out of her mother's bundle a piece of pie stuffed with buckwheat and gave it to him. He took it and began eating. The sun had set by now. His glow died away on the upper part of the road, too. It was getting dark and cool. Lipa and Praskovia walked on for some time, kept crossing themselves.